I believed I had discovered the ideal budget motel for my business trip. I had no idea that I was actually checking in and parking at the Pinewood Motel. The clock had struck midnight, and the fatigue from a long 12-hour journey was heavy on my eyelids. I simply required a spot to rest my head ahead of my important presentation in the morning. The motel had a slightly worn appearance, yet the price was reasonable, and at that moment, one can't be too picky. The night receptionist, seemingly absorbed in his phone, barely glanced up as he handed me the key to room 237. "Checkout is at 11, he mumbled, quickly returning to whatever captured his attention on the screen. I nodded, too weary to concern myself with the absence of warmth. The door groaned as I pushed it open. I discovered a room that had clearly seen better days, with floral wallpaper peeling at the corners. I decided to ignore the questionable stains on the carpet, but the bed looked adequately clean, and that was my primary concern at the moment. I set my travel bag on the chair by the window and then collapsed onto the bed, not even bothering to change. The springs creaked beneath me, yet the mattress turned out to be surprisingly comfortable. That's when I spotted Ita's small red light blinking rhythmically from behind the vintage tube TV. Initially, I suspected it was just an outdated indicator light, yet there was an unusual quality about it that caught my attention. I stood up to examine it more closely. My curiosity is triumphing over my fatigue. As I peered behind the TV, a chill ran down my spine. Nestled among the dusty wires was a small camera, its lens ominously aimed straight at the bed. My thoughts began to move. It felt like a twisted prank, a relic from a cheap film long lost to time, yet I understood the reality beneath it all. Someone had been observing this space, capturing who knows what. I stumbled backward. The entire motel was intertwined with a hidden web of voyeurism. A wave of panic washed over me as I started to scrutinize the room, searching for any concealed gazes lurking in the shadows. That's when I noticed another small red light appearing, this time approaching with my heart racing. I pulled the chair over and climbed up to the vent near the ceiling. To my surprise, I discovered another camera cleverly concealed behind the grill, its lens just visible through one of the slits. I felt unwell. The space I once believed to be a sanctuary at night had transformed into a confinement of invisible gazes. I felt an overwhelming urge to gather my belongings and escape. Yet an unsettling intrigue held me there. As I delved deeper into the situation, I meticulously scoured the entire room, examining every corner and crevice. I inspected the alarm clock on the nightstand, the camera, the smoke detector above the bed, and even the unassuming coat rack on the bathroom door, which turned out to have a discreet lens expertly placed to record anyone using the toilet or shower by the time I completed my thorough investigation. I discovered no fewer than 7 hidden cameras, each one more ingeniously concealed than the previous. The room was a work of art, meticulously crafted to capture every angle and ensure that not a single corner went unnoticed. Perched on the edge of the bed, I buried my face in my hands, grappling with the weight of my recent discovery. In addition, I found myself confronting the receptionist, reaching out to the police, and as the weight of the situation settled in, my thoughts spiraled into a whirlwind of unsettling possibilities as I considered my next steps. A sudden realization struck me. What if there were hidden cameras all around me? Imagine if microphones were discreetly embedded in the walls, recording every sound that fills the air. The anxiety that had been simmering beneath the surface was now erupting, engulfing me entirely. I started to dismantle the room, yanking down curtains, overturning furniture, and peeling back the edges of the carpet. His words brought me to a halt. "Could you clarify what you mean?" A hand tangled in his greasy hair, an uncomfortable reminder of that night months ago when a guest in this room erupted into screams about hidden cameras. The management conducted a thorough inspection of the premises, leaving no stone unturned, yet they found nothing amiss. They mentioned that the individual might have been under the influence of drugs or something similar. I gazed at him in astonishment, yet I discovered them. They seemed to be omnipresent. I turned to reveal the camera positioned behind the TV. Yet, as I reached out, all I encountered was a mere collection of dust and forgotten wires. Confused, I blinked and turned my attention to the vent. Silence, just the alarm clock, the smoke detector, and the coat rack. All appeared to be routine. There were no indications of any surveillance devices present. The receptionist observed me, her expression a blend of sympathy and worry. "Hey there, my friend, I'm not sure what you believe you witnessed, but I assure you, there's nothing to see here. Perhaps a good night's sleep is all you need. It's been quite a long night." Indeed, I nodded almost on autopilot, struggling to grasp the unfolding situation. It was a vision I had conjured. Amidst the chaos, my sanity was slipping away. Thankfully, the receptionist stepped in, assisting me in organizing the room by rearranging the furniture and rehanging the curtains, even suggesting a move to another room for a fresh start. Yet I declined, overwhelmed by embarrassment and confusion. Once he departed, I found myself perched on the edge of the bed, fixated on the TV. The first camera I had encountered was entirely a darker force was at work, a complex scheme crafted to sow doubt in my mind and challenge my grip on reality. That night, sleep eluded me, despite the absence of any evidence that the cameras were real. Every shadow, every reflection, every faint sound kept me on edge, convinced that unseen eyes were monitoring my every move. As the first light of dawn seeped through the tattered curtains, I slipped away without a glance at the morning receptionist. Driving away from the Pinewood Motel, I grappled with a chilling dilemma. Was I more frightened by the thought of being secretly recorded, or by the unsettling possibility that my mind had conjured such a vivid and horrifying hallucination in the weeks that followed? The notion of hidden cameras consumed me, leading me to inspect every hotel room, every public restroom, every dressing room with relentless scrutiny. Equipped with a surveillance scanner I purchased online, my friends and family expressed their concerns about my growing paranoia. Perhaps they had a point, but I couldn't shake the memory of that night, the undeniable certainty I experienced upon uncovering those cameras. Even now, the mystery of what transpired in room 237 of the Pinewood Motel lingers in my mind. There were indeed cameras that vanished when I wasn't paying attention. Perhaps it was merely a figment of my imagination brought on by stress. Perhaps the reality existed in a nuanced space, an explanation that eluded the grasp of my logical reasoning. Once you've experienced the weight of unseen eyes upon you, your perception of a motel room is forever altered. That feeling lingers, never truly fading away. A persistent thought lingers, subtly undermining your feelings of privacy and security. The next time you find yourself checking into a budget motel under the cover of night, take a moment to truly observe your surroundings. Look closely, because you never know who might be lurking just beyond the walls. The instant I spotted his thumb raised against the tumultuous sky, I felt a wave of regret wash over me for stopping. Loneliness and guilt can be powerful forces, especially on a night when the world feels like it's drowning. After hours of driving, the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers and the relentless drumming of rain on my old Chevy's roof were my only companions. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a ribbon of asphalt weaving through the dark, drenched landscape of rural Montana. I was on the run, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly what I was escaping. A failed relationship, a dead-end job, the stifling familiarity of my hometown, or perhaps all of the above. Whatever it was, I had packed a few changes of clothes into a purse, drained my meager savings account, and set off without a clear destination in mind. In that moment, I spotted Hima's solitary silhouette bathed in the glow of my headlights. He stood tall and lean, clad in a weathered leather jacket, a small backpack slung over his shoulder. Despite the rain plastering his hair to his forehead, he managed to return my friendly gesture with a smile as I came to a halt. "Where are you headed?" I inquired, lowering the window just enough for her to catch my words about the storm. "Wherever you're headed is fine by me," she responded, her voice laced with a subtle accent that left me curious. "I'm Jake. Thanks for taking a moment to chat with me." For a brief moment, I paused, the countless warnings about the risks of engaging with strangers flashing through my thoughts. Yet, in her eyes, I saw a weary gratitude that eased my concerns. "Text, climb in," I urged, as I reached to unlock the passenger door. Jake settled into the seat, a hint of rain and damp leather trailing in his wake. "I truly appreciate this," he said, turning to me. "Few would take a moment to pause on a night like this." I resumed my journey on the road. "I understand the feeling of not wanting to leave you behind," so we traveled silently along the path. As I settled in, the soothing rhythm of tires gliding over wet pavement mingled with the distant rumble of thunder, creating a serene atmosphere. Jake asked once more, "So, what brings you down this road, Alex?" I pondered, my hands clutching the steering wheel with increasing intensity. I never revealed my name to him. Jake appeared to pick up on my unease, as he swiftly interjected, "I noticed it on your keychain. I didn't intend to startle you when you opened the door." I made an effort to unwind naturally. It was logical. I was merely being overly cautious. "No big deal," I reassured myself, attempting to sound nonchalant. "I was simply on a road trip. I needed some mental clarity." Jake nodded in understanding. Sometimes, stepping away from everything is the key to discovering what truly matters. "Where you truly belong," he said, and something about his tone sent shivers down my spine. I brushed it off, redirecting the conversation as you inquired, "What's your story?" Jake reclined in his seat, a subtle smile playing on his lips. "Oh, I'm somewhat of a wanderer. I've never been one to linger in a single spot for too long. The journey calls to me." Jake had a remarkable gift for storytelling, crafting vivid images with his words that transported me right into the heart of his tales. Yet, as our conversation unfolded, an unsettling feeling lingered in the back of my mind, hinting that something was amiss. It began with the little things. He brought up aspects of my life that he seemed to know I hadn't disclosed, like when he inquired about my dog Max. I didn't bring up having a dog or what his name is. When I brought it up, Jake simply chuckled and suggested I should have mentioned it earlier and let it go. Next, the oddly precise inquiries arrived, probing about the dent in my rear bumper and whether I had taken care of it following the incident. I never brought up any incidents, and the dent was so minor that it nearly slipped my mind as the miles rolled on. Serendipity unfolded in abundance. I was familiar with my favorite coffee shop in the city and the beautiful route I used to travel to work. Every revelation, from the name of my first high school crush to the smallest detail, washed over me like a tide of unease, tightening in my chest. I attempted to justify my thoughts, believing that I possessed a keen ability to read people and draw informed conclusions. Perhaps I was engaged in conversation. I might have been revealing more about my life than I initially thought, yet I understood deep down that this wasn't true. The details Jake was aware of were far too personal. It was unmistakably specific, too intimate to be mere chance. The rain had started to ease, yet the sky remained ominously dark. We found ourselves enveloped in desolation, surrounded only by barren fields and dilapidated barns, barely discernible through the murky haze. I couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness that surrounded us, you know, Alex. Jake spoke up, his voice shifting to a more serious note. "I've truly appreciated our conversation. Engaging in a conversation of such depth is a rare occurrence for me." He took a deep breath. My mouth went suddenly dry. "Absolutely, that was quite intriguing." I managed to speak, though my voice felt strained even to my own ears. At that moment, Jake pivoted fully in my direction. I felt as if I were a rabbit. As I found myself locked in the gaze of a wolf, I couldn't help but confess that I've been following your story for quite a while. It felt as though the air had been drawn from my lungs. My narrative softly reveals that they will take you. At this very moment, in this precise location, my heart began to race. What on earth are you talking about? Come on, Alex, you must have figured it out by now. Jake tilted his body just a bit closer to me. The insights I have about you, the serendipitous moments that continue to accumulate. I've been observing for quite a while, patiently anticipating the ideal opportunity to make a proper introduction. My thoughts were in a whirlwind. How long had it been trailing me? And above all, what I truly desired. "Can you tell me about yourself?" murmured, struggling to find the words. Jake released a soft chuckle. "I am whoever you need me to be, Alex, a friend, a confidant, or even a stranger seeking assistance." I came to the sudden conclusion that I couldn't endure another moment in that car. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, swerving unexpectedly. He remained unfazed, his hand resting on the dashboard, a steady smile on his face. Just as the car came to a halt, I reached for my seatbelt, but Jake was quicker. His grip tightened around my arm with an unsettling intensity. "Refrain from taking any action." His voice was steady, laced with an underlying threat. "We're about to dive into the most exciting chapter of our tale." Panic surged in my chest as I struggled against his hold. "Release me." Jake shook his head, his fingers tightening their grip. "I regret to say, Alex, that I've put too much into our journey together to walk away now." In that instant, I realized my nightmare was only just starting. Jake tucked his other hand into his jacket, sending a shiver down my spine. He raced down my spine. I wasn't about to linger there, waiting to uncover what he was concealing with every ounce of strength I possessed. I suddenly released his hold and, without a moment's hesitation, I swung my fist toward his face. I never anticipated causing him significant pain, but the shock was sufficient for him to release my arm. Seizing the opportunity, I flung open the car door and leaped out into the open air. Moreover, I crashed down onto the slick earth, sensing the gravel and mud saturating around me. With determination fueling my every step, I sprinted forward, my eyes fixed ahead, oblivious to my surroundings. My singular focus was clear: escape Jake at all costs. Suddenly, the sound of a car door slamming open echoed behind me. Alex shouted mockingly, "You're going to make this more fun than it needs to be." My lungs burned, my legs threatened to give out, but I pressed on. The road felt impossibly distant, and I had no clue how far the next town was. All I could see were open fields and an old barn just a few meters ahead me only option. I approached it, praying the door would be open. When I reached it, I pulled the rusty handle, and thankfully, the door creaked long and pitifully as it swung open. I slipped inside and closed it carefully, trying to avoid any noise. The barn's interior was shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the occasional lightning that sliced through the sky. The musty scent of aged hay and rust filled my lungs as I struggled to steady my breathing. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside. Jake drew nearer, his voice resonating through the shadows. "Do you honestly believe this will aid you?" I pressed my hand against my mouth, compelling myself to stay quiet. The door groaned under the pressure of my push, and now you leave me no choice but to take the difficult route. My heart raced with such intensity that I feared he could hear it. I navigated carefully through the darkness, searching for anything that could serve as a means of protection. My hand stumbled upon an ancient shovel, cloaked in dust and draped with cobwebs. While it may not have been substantial, it certainly surpassed having nothing at all. I propped myself against the barn wall, anticipation building as the door creaked open slowly, sending a shiver down my spine. Jake's silhouette emerged in the stormlight. He stood with a relaxed posture, yet there was an unsettling quality to his movements that sent chills down my spine. It wasn't the stride of a seeker, it was the confident walk of someone who already had their target in sight, wouldn't you agree? With a chilling composure, he remarked, "You disappoint me just a bit. I expected you to be more willing to collaborate." I remained quiet, yet it was fine. He pressed on, as not everyone embraces their destiny with such ease. Jake stepped further into the barn, realizing it was now or never. I gripped the shovel tightly, and in an instant, I steadied myself with every ounce of strength I had. The blow was unforgiving. The shovel connected with the side of his head, producing a muted thud, and Jake walked away. With a fierce snarl, he staggered to the side, reaching out a hand toward the 100. I didn't stick around to find out if he was okay. I bolted, flinging myself through the barn door, and hit the road at full speed, pushing my legs to their limits. As the rain pelted my face, I sprinted forward. Mud splattered against my shoes, the frigid air seared my lungs, yet I pressed on without hesitation. It was only when the lights of a truck came into view that I realized. In the distance, a glimmer of relief washed over me as I dashed onto the road, arms flailing in desperation. The truck screeched to a halt, and the driver, an older gentleman with a weathered face, lowered his window, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What the hell is wrong with you, boy?" he asked. "Do you need help?" "Please, Jade, there's a man following me. He wants to hurt me." The driver's demeanor shifted as he scanned the surroundings, concern etched on his features. "Get in," he said urgently, opening the door. I didn't think twice. I slid into the passenger seat and shut the door firmly. The truck roared to life, and as I glanced in the rearview mirror, a wave of unease washed over me. There was Jake, standing in the middle of the road, that unsettling smile plastered on his face. He didn't move to follow us. He simply stood there, as if he held a secret I wasn't privy to. As the truck sped away, my heart raced with each passing mile. To regain my composure, the driver escorted me to the closest police station, where I recounted the entire incident. The officers recorded my statement and dispatched patrol cars to the location where Jake had me, but unfortunately, they were unable to locate him. The car remained stranded in the gutter, my bag was untouched, yet Jake was nowhere to be found. It felt like he had vanished from existence for days. Sleep eluded me. Each time I shut my eyes, his smile danced before me. His presence loomed over me, a shadow lurking in the darkness. Months have passed since that unforgettable night. My daily schedule, I moved to a new city. Even though I no longer journey solo, there are moments when a feeling of unease still washes over me. As I walk along the street, I feel an unmistakable presence trailing behind me. As night falls, a shadowy figure emerges in the distance, making my heart skip a beat. In a fleeting instant, I sense its presence, lurking, watching, and most unsettling of all, I am acutely aware that it will come back. Jake was more than just a man. He was a shadow that lingered in my life, and inevitably, shadows always find their way back. The forest was intended to be my sanctuary, a place to refresh my thoughts and bond with the natural world. However, it transformed into a haunting nightmare that would linger in my memory for years to come. As a lifelong lover of the great outdoors, I've recently found that the demands of urban living have begun to weigh on me. The constant clamor, the relentless influx of emails, the overwhelming sensation of being enveloped by concrete and steel everything was reaching a breaking point. So, I made the decision to escape for a week and immerse myself in the tranquility of solo camping deep in the Adirondacks. The initial days were exactly what I craved. The crisp mountain air invigorated my lungs, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze soothed my frayed nerves, and the starry sky above the night illuminated the insignificance of my worries in the vast tapestry of existence. I strolled through the daylight, engaging my body and relishing the uncomplicated joy of each step forward. As night fell, I kindled a cozy campfire, prepared a straightforward meal, and immersed myself in a soothing book before drifting off to sleep. It was on the fourth night that the atmosphere began to shift ominously. I had established my camp in a cozy spot naturally, my tent nestled snugly between two towering pines. The flames danced below, creating shimmering shadows that played across the forest floor. Just as I was drifting off to sleep, an unfamiliar sound pierced the tranquility of the forest. The sound eluded my senses at first, blending seamlessly with the typical night noises. Yet, as I focused, it sharpened into clarity-heavy footsteps, slow and purposeful, weaving through the underbrush just beyond the perimeter of my camp. Moreover, I became paralyzed. My heart started to the pounding in my chest felt primal, like the heartbeat of a wild creature, perhaps a deer or even a black bear. Yet, beneath the surface, I recognized the truth. This rhythm was too steady, too deliberate to belong to anything other than a human being. I called out, my voice echoing softly in the expansive shadows. "Hello? Someone is present. The morning arrived without incident, and as daylight broke, I found a way to reassure myself that it had all been a figment of my imagination, nothing more than stress-induced paranoia. That was it. I dedicated the day to walking, pushing myself more than usual in a bid to tire myself out and guarantee a restful night's sleep. When I finally made it back to my camp, my legs ached, but my mind was refreshingly clear. I sparked the flames, prepared a delicious meal, and got comfortable. On a tranquil evening, I spotted the footprints, subtly concealed by the foliage, creating a trail that guided me right to the perimeter of my camp before diverging into the forest. The footprints were oversized, and the sole's pattern was unrecognizable as my own. It didn't quite align with the one in my hiking boots. With hands shaking, I grabbed my flashlight and ventured down the trail. It navigated around my entire camp, coming within mere meters of where I had been resting. The creator of those footprints had been observing me, analyzing my camp from every possible perspective. But that wasn't the worst part. When I finished the circuit and returned to my tent, the beam of my flashlight caught something that made my heart race. There, on one of the pines next to my tent, were deep scratches on the bark, 4 parallel lines, each about a foot long, too high to have been made by any animal I knew. I staggered back. This couldn't be happening. I was alone here, miles from the nearest village or camp. There shouldn't be anyone else around, let alone something capable of leaving those marks. I hurriedly retreated to my tent, zipping it up with trembling hands, as if the thin nylon could provide any real protection. Sleeping was out of the question. I lay there, every muscle tense, listening to the sounds of the forest with renewed fear. Every rustle of branches could be a step. Every gust of wind could be heavy breathing just outside my tent as the night dragged on. As the sounds evolved, they transformed. The familiar noises of the forest diminished, giving way to something else, something unsettling. It started with a steady tapping, reminiscent of a heartbeat resonating through the ground, followed by the enigmatic hissing whispers that seemed to emerge from all directions simultaneously. I pressed my hands against my ears, shut my eyes tight, and whispered to myself that it wasn't real, yet the sounds only intensified, more urgent, the relentless tapping. The atmosphere shifted to monotonous thuds, murmurs escalated to an intense crescendo, and beneath it all, an unprecedented sound emerged, a deep, primal growl that resonated within my very bones. Time slipped away as I remained there, frozen in a grip of terror. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, minutes blurred into hours, until, at last, I succumbed to the overwhelming fatigue and fainted. As I opened my eyes, the sun hung brilliantly in the sky, casting its warm glow through as I emerged from the confines of the tent. A fleeting thought crossed my mind that perhaps it had all been a terrible dream. But reality hit me hard, a stark reminder of the chaos that surrounded me. The camp lay in shambles. The fire pit was a mess of scattered ashes and charred logs, while my knapsack, once propped against a tree, was now in ruins, its contents strewn across the forest floor. Encircling the camp was a ring of peculiar, deep footprints, but the true horror awaited just beyond the devastation. There, arranged in a crude semicircle before my tent, were a dozen fist-sized stones, each perfectly balanced atop a small animal, skull, squirrels, rabbits, and one that chillingly resembled a fox. I didn't pause to gather my things. I didn't even bother to change the clothes I'd slept in, so I grabbed my keys from the mess that was my backpack and ran like a madman, as if my life depended on it. Because I did. The branches scratched my face, the roots threatened to trip me up, but I didn't care. I kept going, driven only by the most primitive survival instinct. When I finally emerged in the small parking area, I almost burst into tears of relief. My hands were shaking, so much so that I could barely open the door as I slid into the seat. A movement on the edge of the forest caught my attention. Something big, something moving through the trees. I didn't stick around to find out what it was. I started the engine and stepped on the accelerator, leaving behind a cloud of gravel and dust. I didn't stop until I was back in the woods. The city, surrounded by the comforting sound of traffic and human activity, was only then parked in my driveway with my hands still clutching the steering wheel that I allowed myself to collapse. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to make sense of what had happened. researched the local fauna, convinced that there must be a rational explanation for what I experienced. But nothing fit. There was no animal in that region capable of doing those things. Marks of leaving those footprints or organizing skulls in a semicircle. I considered reporting it to the authorities, but what would I tell them that something unknown terrified me in the woods, that I heard impossible sounds at night? They would think I was crazy, or worse, that I was making it all up. So I kept the story to myself. But the experience changed me. I can't sleep without a light on. Every unexpected sound makes me jump, and the forest that was once my sanctuary now fills me with unwavering fear. It's been years, and I've never been back to those woods. Sometimes when the wind blows a certain way, I think hearing those whispers again calling me back, and in my darkest moments I wonder what if it followed me home, what if even now it's still out there watching me, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The only thing that I know for sure, that I will never see nature with the same eyes again, because now I know that deep within the forest, in its darkest and most hidden parts, there are things that defy explanation. Things that remind us that despite all our civilization we are still prey at the bottom. So the next time you are alone in the forest and you hear something that doesn't fit, ask yourself, it's just or there's something out there, something ancient and indescribable watching you right beyond the glow of your campfire. I always thought the scariest thing that could happen in the middle of the night was a burglar breaking into my house. That was until I woke up and found a stranger watching me silently from the foot of my bed. It had been a long day at work, and I had collapsed in bed without even changing my clothes. The last thing I remember is looking at my phone. The bright screen showed 11:42 p.m. before my eyes closed. I don't know what woke me up. Maybe it was some sixth sense, or maybe the weight of that unwavering gaze. But when I opened my eyes, there he was, a tall and thin man, standing perfectly motionless at the foot of my bed. The dim light filtering through my curtains, it allowed me to make out his silhouette, but his face remained shrouded in shadows. He didn't move, he didn't speak. He just watched me for a moment. I thought he was dreaming loudly, waiting for the figure to disappear. But when I opened my eyes again, it was still there, very real, very present. My heart began to beat so hard that I was sure I should hear it. I remained motionless, terrified, fearing that any movement could provoke it. My mind ran to all speed with possibilities. I was a thief, a psychopath, some deranged stalker. I don't know how long we were like this, trapped in that terrifying tableau. It could have been seconds or hours. Time seemed to stretch and bend under the weight of my fear. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, I managed to murmur a single word. Who? Before I could finish the question, the figure moved as fast as a blink of an eye, reached out his hand and turned on the lamp from my bedside table. The light flooded the room. Momentarily, I blinked quickly, trying to adjust my eyes to the sudden brightness, and then I saw him with clarity for the first time. He was older than I expected, perhaps in his 60s. His face was deeply furrowed with wrinkles, with a neatly trimmed white beard and piercing blue eyes. He wore a dark suit that looked expensive, although somewhat wrinkled, as if he had been wearing it but what really chilled my blood was his expression. There was no anger on his face, no obvious malice, just intense curiosity, as if I were a fascinating creature he was studying. "Hi, David." His voice was surprisingly soft and polite. "I've waited a long time to meet you." I slowly sat up, my back pressed against the headboard of the bed. "How do you know my name?" I asked in a trembling voice. "Who you are." What? The man wants to smile, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Who I am is not important as to what I want." He paused, slightly tilting his head. "I want to understand." I swallowed hard. "Understand that his eyes never left mine. Your decisions, your way." I shook my head, feeling confusion mingle with fear. "No, I don't understand how he got in here." The man gestured with his hand, as if the fact of having broken into my apartment was an irrelevant detail. "Tell me, David, why did you choose to be an accountant?" The question caught me so off guard that for a moment I almost forgot the terror that consumed me. That I am good with numbers. It seemed to me a stable career. The man nodded thoughtfully. "And the girl you dated in college? Sarah, why did you break up with her?" A shiver ran through my back. How the hell did I know about Sarah? We had dated 5 years ago. We were interested in different things, I replied cautiously. She wanted to settle down. "I number interesting," she murmured as if she were taking mental notes. She paused before asking, "And your mother? Why haven't you talked to her in 2 years?" Fear turned to anger. "How the hell does she know all these things? She's been spying on me." The man held my gaze, and I felt that he immobilizes with the intensity of his attention. "I know everything about you, David, every decision you've made, every path you followed or left behind. I've watched your life unfold with great interest. My breathing was erratic. Why me?" His smile faded, and for the first time his expression seemed tinged with sadness. "Because you are I, David, the fourth pair." Suddenly getting smaller. What the hell is he talking about? He sighed deeply as if he was gathering patience. "It's complicated. Let's say it's you in another timeline. Another version of yourself on a different path." I shook my head hard. "That's impossible. It's crazy." I'm asking softly. "Look at me well, David, and I did it. I really did it." I contoured his nose, the shape of his jaw. They were mine, aged for decades, but unmistakable. The air left my lungs. "This can't be real," I murmured, pressing Las Palmas against my eyes. "It has to be a dream." "I assure you this is very real," he said. "I spent years developing the technology to cross between timelines, everything to find you, to understand why our lives were so different." I put my hands down and looked at him in disbelief. If what he says is true, what happened in his timeline? How did his life end being so different from the mine? His expression darkened with something akin to regret. "In my world, I never broke up with Sarah. We married young and had children. I never became an accountant. Instead, I was physics, driven by a fascination with the nature of time and reality, and that led him to this." Gesticulate to him, towards the impossibility of the situation. He nodded. "Among other things, my life has been intense, full of wonders and horrors that I barely you could imagine, and throughout it all I've wondered about the path I didn't take upon you." The weight of his words took my breath away. If he was telling the truth, then everything I knew about reality was wrong. If he was lying, then there was a crazy man in my room who knew too much about my life, and the worst thing was that a part of me believed him. Maybe it was his voice, his conviction, or maybe it was because I saw myself in it too. I swallowed hard. "And now what?" I asked. "He found me. He's seen how my life turned out. What's next?" My other me was silent for a thoughtful moment. "Now I guess we talked." He looked at me intensely. "I want to understand every decision you made, that I didn't take, every crossroads where our lives separated." And so we did. We talked for hours. We broke down my life. Hours in my life. He asked me about my work, my friends, my dreams, and my regrets. In return I questioned him about his world, his experiences, the life he had led that was so different from mine. As the night progressed, the fear began to dissipate, giving way to a strange fascination. It was like looking at myself in a distorted mirror, seeing a reflection of what could have been. The sky began to clear when finally he stood up. "I have to go," he said. I felt a twinge of unexpected loss. "I'll see him again." He gave me an enigmatic smile. "Who knows?" He went to the door, but before he left he turned one last time. "David, don't be afraid to take risks. Sometimes unexpected roads lead to the most extraordinary destinies." And with that he disappeared. When I ran after him, my apartment was empty, no open doors, no traces of his presence. Was as if I'd never been there. But I knew the truth. I'd been there. I'd talked to him, with me. He collapsed me in bed, my mind spinning in a whirlwind of unanswered questions. It was a warning, an opportunity, or just a sign that life is never as linear as we think. Whatever it was, one thing was for sure. After that night I never saw my reflection of it again. I never thought I'd ever be afraid of the dark again, not my age. But when your neighbor just goes out at night and drags suspicious packages, even the bravest soul would start sleeping with the lights on. It all started when I moved into my new apartment in the city. After years of sharing spaces with roommates, I was excited to have a place just for me. The building was old, with character, according to the realtor for me. That meant creaking floors and temperamental plumbing. But I didn't care. It felt like home. The first few weeks were spent arranging my things and exploring the neighborhood. That's when I noticed my neighbor lived right across the street. Across the hall. I never saw him during the day. I just caught him in brief moments of the morning, when he walked in or out of his apartment. He was tall and slim with hair. Black, always a little messy, but what caught my attention the most were her intense dark eyes, as if they could see right through you. At first I didn't think much about it. Many people work night shifts or have strange schedules. But over time I began to notice other things. The thick curtains that always covered her windows, the metallic smell that sometimes came out from under her door, and most disturbingly, the sounds, banging, scratching, and on one occasion, what I would swear was a gasp. I tried to rationalize what maybe I was an artist working with metal or having nightmares, but deep in my mind a voice was telling me something wasn't right. One night coming back from a party, I saw it. I was in the hallway, dragging a large bundle inside a black bag. When our eyes met, I saw something in his look, panic, anger before I could process it, disappeared downstairs the next morning. The police were outside the building. A young woman had disappeared in the neighborhood the night before. My mind returned to the lump I had seen. It was possible, but I doubted. I had no evidence, only suspicions and an overactive imagination. In the end I said nothing, but doubt tormented me. The following days I became more observant. I began to mentally record her schedules. Any strange detail made me felt like a spy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was happening right across the hall. One night when I couldn't sleep, I heard its door open. I approached the peephole. What I saw made me hold my breath. My neighbor was dragging another large bag, but this time the bag was moving. I heard a muffled sound from inside. My skin stood on end. I ran to get my phone to call the police, but then I doubted. What if I was wrong? What if I was just making assumptions based on coincidences? While hesitating, I heard a loud go followed by a growl of frustration. Without thinking, I opened the door. My neighbor was there. The bag on the floor had broken, spilling its contents, but instead of a corpse there were cats, at least a dozen little kittens, meowing and writhing on the carpet in the hallway. My neighbor looked at me with his face ablaze with embarrassment. "I can explain it," he said, and he did it over a cup of coffee in my kitchen while the kittens climbed on top of us. He told me the truth. He worked at night in a 24-hour veterinary clinic. The strange smell came from the medical supplies he sometimes brought home. The sounds were from the animals he rescued. The bag of the night the girl disappeared had been a pregnant cat that she took to the clinic for an emergency C-section. The supposed scream I had heard was probably a cat in heat, and her furtive behavior was because the building had a strict no-pets policy. She was always hiding the animals she rescued. I was relieved and a little stupid. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I thought you were another thing." My neighbor Dave laughed. "I guess I haven't been the best neighbor. I definitely didn't kid the rest of the night playing with the kittens." He told me about some of the strangest cases he'd seen at the clinic. I confessed to him all the crazy theories I'd woven about him. When dawn broke, Dave picked up the kittens to take them back to his apartment. "You know," I said before he came out, "I could help you with this. Seriously." His eyes sparkled, and the owner of the building smiled. "Leave it to me." Eventually we worked together to convince the landlord to change the no-pet policy. We collected signatures. We presented studies on the benefits of having pets, and finally we managed to make it happen. Now the building is full of rescued cats and dogs. Dave and I became good friends. We spent many afternoons on my balcony watching the sunset with a cat on my lap. Sometimes I remember those first weeks and I laugh at how wrong I was. My perception. But I also remember fear, paranoia, sleepless nights imagining the worst, taught me something important. That sometimes the monsters we think we see are just products of our own mind, and that the only way to combat fear is to open the door, look closer and know the truth, because who knows, that neighbor who gives you a bad feeling could be your best friend in the future, and that you thought was hiding dark secrets could become a refuge for those who need it most. Now when I wake up in the night to some strange noise, it no longer terrifies me. That it's just Dave coming home after saving another life 4 legs at a time. The first sign that something was terribly wrong in our new home. It wasn't the creaks on the floor or the flashing lights. Was the morning I woke up to find all the kitchen chairs stacked in a perfect pyramid on the dining room table. Been so excited about this house after years of living in small, noisy apartments. Sarah and I had finally saved up enough to pay down to a real house. It was an old Victorian house, a bit run down, but with what the realtor had described as good bones. The price, it was surprisingly low for the area. But we didn't question our luck. We were too busy. Our future on this lovely renovation project. The first few weeks were crazy to unpack, paint, and settle in. Sure, the house had its quirks, stairs that creaked, unexpected drafts, a stubborn window that refused to open. Nothing we couldn't handle. We owned the house now, after all. These little imperfections, just character. But then the incidents began. Little things. At first I would come home and find a book I had left on the coffee table, now on the mantelpiece. Sarah would swear she'd hung her jacket in the closet, only to find it folded over a kitchen chair. We'd laugh about it, blaming it on the stress of moving or our own distraction, until things got worse. One morning, every day, the pictures in the living room were turned towards the wall. Another day we found all the shoes in the house lined up in perfect rows in the hallway. Each time Sarah and I exchanged restless glances, challenging me. But the night of the pyramid of chairs, we could no longer ignore it. I stood on the threshold of the kitchen with my forgotten cup of coffee in my hand, looking at the impossible structure before me. There was no way this could be just a figment of our imagination. Someone or something had been in our house while we slept. Sarah called, my voice sounding strange, tense. You have to see this. She went downstairs to a sleepy, rubbing her eyes. When she saw the chairs, she stopped and dried her face, losing all color. Tom whispered, what's going on? I shook my head. I had no answers. We spent the next hour checking every door and window, looking for signs of forced entry. Nothing. Everything. It was locked, just as we had left it the night before. It was then that I installed the cameras, bought a set of wireless security cameras, and placed them throughout the house. If someone was coming in, they would be caught. Sarah thought I was exaggerating, but I noticed the relief in her eyes. We both needed answers for a few days. The house was quiet, our things stayed in place. We started to relax. Maybe we had just been imagining everything. We even joked about it, calling our ghost by ridiculous names. But exactly a week after the chairs incident, it all started again, and this time there was no way to deny it. That morning when I woke up and went downstairs, I felt something was out of place. The house was completely silent, but there was a tension in the air, as if the house itself was holding its breath. When I walked in the living room, the coffee fell out of my hands. All our family photos were on the floor, organized in a perfect spiral in the center of the room. The frames that were previously hung on the wall or on shelves now formed a pattern so precise that I couldn't, by coincidence. My heart pounded as I took out my phone and opened the security cameras app. I retraced the recording to in the early morning, looking for any clue. The video began with the room empty and quiet. Nothing moved, nothing changed. But at 3:17 in the morning something happened. One by one, the marcos began to rise into the air as if invisible hands were taking them, without any sound, without any visible force, moving them. The paintings floated from their places and descended gently to the floor, settling into that impossible spiral. My hands trembled as I called for Sarah. Sarah, you have to see this. She ran down the stairs, and when she saw the photos on the floor, her face was filled with panic. I took my phone and showed her the video. Tell me this makes sense, you murmur, running up the stairs. We grabbed the first thing we found and left the house without looking back. We stayed at Sarah's sister's house for a few days. We tried to explain what had happened, but she looked at us with a mixture of skepticism and too bad. The police didn't take us seriously either. They searched the house and found no signs of forced entry or any evidence that anyone had been there. The detective who took our statement suggested we were stressed about the move, but we knew the truth. Still, after a week, we had no choice but to go back. We couldn't keep imposing ourselves on his sister's house. We had a mortgage that paying. At first the house seemed normal, everything was in place, and for a while we tried to convince ourselves that what we had seen could not be real, but we knew that something was waiting for us. We became paranoid. We slept with the lights on. I ran my hands on the wall, and I felt a subtle edge, almost imperceptible, a small hole. My heart beat hard as I pressed against it with a soft click. The wallet opened. It was a hidden door. I held my breath before turning on my phone's flashlight and lighting the inside. It was a small, dark, and empty room. But in the center of the room there was a chair, just a simple wooden chair placed in front of the door. My skin stood on end. I stepped inside, raising the light to inspect the walls. It was then that I saw the writings. The walls were covered of names, dates, and snippets of conversations. Our conversations. Every word Sarah and I had said since we moved was written on that wall in frantic calligraphy, and on top of the wall in big, crooked letters, a message that made me tremble. Welcome home. With trembling hands, I tore off a piece of paper pinned to the back of the chair. It was a note. I said, I've been waiting for. I stepped back from knocking, feeling the air caught in my throat. I couldn't be going through. I ran upstairs screaming for Sarah, but when I got to the hallway, I stopped in dry. Sarah was there, but something was wrong. She stood upright, too stiff. Her expression was empty. When she turned to me, her face was expressionless, her eyes dark and deep, and then she spoke, welcome home, Tom. But it wasn't. Her voice was deeper, older, with an accent that I couldn't identify. My skin froze. Sarah. I whispered the thing she was wearing. Her face smiled in an unnatural way. I'm the house, Tom. Her voice echoed in the hallway, deeper and more distorted. I'm her story, her memory. My stomach churned when she took a step toward me. And now you and Sarah are part of me. I slowly backed away, my mind running in circles. Where is Sarah? Here, she replied, and then all the house lights flickered and went out. My heart stopped. Total darkness, a suffocating silence filled the air, then the sound of slow footsteps approaching. You can't escape, Tom, whispered his voice in the darkness. You're already part of the house. I ran blindly down the hallway, tripping over the furniture, hitting me against the walls. I tried to open the front door. It didn't move. I ran to the kitchen. I tried the windows, sealed the house. She wouldn't let me go. The footsteps were coming closer. The lights were flashing a second long enough to see a silhouette at the end of the hallway. A silhouette in the shape of Sarah, but it wasn't her. I knew it wasn't, and then the whole house trembled. A sound like a whisper ran along the walls. The photos in the living room began to fall. The chairs moved by themselves. The floor under my feet vibrated, and in the middle of it, all the laughter, a low guttural laugh, as if the walls themselves were alive. I don't know how I made it. I don't remember how I escaped. The next thing I know, I was in the street barefoot and shaking with the dark and silent house behind me. I ran without looking back. I never came back. I never knew what happened to Sarah, or if it was really her that I saw that night, but sometimes when I pass by on that street, I swear I see her silhouette in the upstairs window watching me wait, and I know the house is still there, waiting for its next resident, because the house is always hungry and never lets those who belong to it go. The scent of pine and wood smoke should have been comforting. Instead, it only intensified the growing sense of unease in my stomach as I realized that our romantic getaway was Jake and I had been dating for a little over a year when we decided to take our first trip together. We both loved nature. So when we found an ad for a quaint cabin in the mountains, we thought it was perfect. The photos showed a cozy interior with a stone fireplace, and the description promised hiking trails and a nearby lake. It was just what we needed to escape the stress of the drive. There was beautiful with roads before that took us higher and higher among the towering pine trees. When we arrived at the small town closest to our cabin, I noticed how quiet it was. A couple of locals were on the street but looked at us strangely when we passed by in the car. They are probably not used to tourists, Jake said with a smile when I mentioned it to him. I nodded, trying to ignore the awkwardness of those looks. We stopped at the village store to buy provisions. The old man behind the counter was polite, but there was something about the way he watched us that got on my nerves. As we paid, leaned over to us. "They're going to stay in the old cabin?" Mackenzie asked quietly. I nodded, surprised. "Yes, we rent it for a week." "He knows it." The man hesitated, glancing furtively around as if he was afraid someone would hear him. "Just be careful up there," he said, "and whatever happens, don't go out after dark." Before I could ask him what he meant, the doorbell rang and another customer came in. The old man straightened up and changed his attitude immediately. "Have a good stay," he said aloud, as if the previous conversation had never happened. When we went to the cabin, I told Jake about the man's strange notice. He just laughed. I'm sure he was just trying to scare outsiders, or it's a local legend to attract tourists. I tried to let it go, but something in the old man's warning left me uneasy. The cabin was beautiful, just like in the photos. We spent the afternoon unpacking and praying in the nearby woods. When the sun started to set, we huddled in front of the fireplace with a bottle of the uneasiness I had felt before began to fade into the warmth of the moment. Until after midnight I woke up with a strange sensation. Something was not right. I opened my eyes and listened carefully. Voices came from outside. They were far away, as if they were in the woods, but something in the cadence of their tone gave me goosebumps. I shook Jake. "You hear that?" He frowned sleepily, then sat up. The voices continued. "Probably just locals making a campfire or something," he muttered, but he didn't sound convinced. We crawled to the window and looked outside. At first we didn't see anything, but then among the trees I made out movement, figures, silhouettes sliding between the trunks, moving in the same direction, and were carrying something. Torches. The orange glow flickered in the darkness of the forest. "What the hell?" Jake whispered. We watched silently. They emerged from the trees, wearing strange old-fashioned clothes like from another era, and they were all heading towards a clearing we'd found earlier that day. Curiosity got the better of me. "We need to see what they're doing," I whispered. Jake looked at me like I was crazy. "You didn't hear the old man in the store? Let's leave after dark." "Oh, please," I said. "You don't want to know what's going on." After a few minutes of persuasion, he agreed reluctantly. We dressed quickly and walked out in silence, following the glow of the torches. The closer we got, the clearer the sound. A chant. I didn't understand the words, but the rhythm made my skin crawl. We hid behind a rock at the edge of the clearing. What we saw took my breath away. Dozens of people gathered in a circle around a large stone. In the center was an altar, and on the altar a young woman was tied up, struggling to free herself. "We have to do something," I whispered to Jake, but when I looked at him, his expression worried me. His eyes were glazed over. He swayed slightly to the rhythm of the chant. Jake shook him, but he didn't react. The singing became more frantic. A tall man dressed in a black robe approached the altar in his hand. A curved knife glistened in the light of the torches. He knew what that was about to happen without thinking about it. I stood up, stopped. The entire clearing was silent. Dozens of faces turned towards me. Their expressions were empty without emotions. Their expressions were empty without emotions, and then, as if they were one, they began to advance towards us. Jake runs. I screamed, but he didn't move until several hands grabbed him and separated him from me. I was also held by cold arms, and lifeless they dragged us to the altar. The young woman's body was no longer there. I didn't know what had happened to her, and I didn't want to know. The crowd pushed me against the stone above. The night sky looked strange. The stars seemed to move, spinning in possible patterns. The man in the black robe approached with a knife raised. When he lowered the hood, I almost screamed. It was the old man in the shop I warned, he said softly. I warned them not to come out after dark. The knife descended. I closed my eyes, waiting for the pain, but it never came. In its place I heard screams of panic. I opened my eyes just in time to see something huge rushing into the crowd, a huge dark creature. The cultists were fleeing in all directions. I felt the bonds on my wrists loosen. I didn't hesitate. I rolled off the altar and ran towards Jake, who finally he seemed to have woken up from his trance. Together, we ran back to the cabin. The screams still echoed in the woods. At dawn we took our things and left without looking back. We didn't tell anyone what we saw. Who would believe us? But sometimes when I'm in the woods and I smell the wood smoke and the pine tree, I remember and wonder what that creature was, if it saved us or if it was just waiting. I was filled with purpose that night. Filled me with terror. If only I had trusted my instinct, I could have avoided the horrible experience that followed. I had been working as an Uber driver for months, supplementing my income as a graphic designer. I liked the flexibility of the job and meeting new people. Plus, driving around the city at night had something relaxing. It was Tuesday, shortly after 11 p.m. I was considering ending my day, when the app notified me of one last trip. The pickup point was in an area I didn't know well, an industrial district with abandoned factories and warehouses. It wasn't the kind of place where anyone would wait for an Uber at that hour. I hesitated for a moment with my finger floating over the accept something button. It didn't feel right, but I thought about the money extra, and in my goal of saving for a new camera, one more trip wouldn't hurt. True, how wrong I was. When I got to the address, I came across a brick building that seemed to have been abandoned for years. There was no one outside. I checked the app to make sure I was in the right place. Just as I was going to call the passenger, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a tall man, probably about 3 years old. And so many years, with a dark dad and the hood down over his face. He was carrying something in his hand. My heart rate quickened. It was a bag. A gun. Opened the back door and slid inside, dropping a duffel bag on the seat. I heard a dull thump as I touched the fabric. "Good night," I said, trying to sound calm. "Where are we going?" The man didn't respond immediately. Through the OV, I saw him look as if making sure we were alone, then leaned forward and spoke in a raspy and deep voice. "Just drive, I'll tell you where to go." Every instinct in my body was screaming to get this guy out of my car and get out of there. But I was afraid of what I might do if I refused. With trembling hands, I started the car and drove away from the curb. We drove in tense silence for several minutes. The man kept moving in the back seat, his hand never moving away from the bag. My mind was going 1,000 an hour, imagining all kinds of terrifying scenarios. He was a dealer, a murderer, something worse. Finally, he spoke again. "Take the next one to the right." I obeyed, turning into an even darker street flanked by more ruined buildings. This wasn't right. I tried to stay calm. "Hey," I said in a forced voice, "I need knowing the destination for the app is company policy. I can't drive without a direction." The man leaned forward so close I could feel his breath on the back of my neck. "You'll go where I tell you unless you want trouble." Fear paralyzed me. This was no longer just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. I had to get out of this situation quickly. I remembered that there was a gas station open 24 hours away, 1 kilometer away. If I managed to get there, maybe I could call for help. "I understand," I said, faking his mission. "I'll do what I say." The man seemed to relax a little and lay back again. I took a breath, preparing my next move. When I saw the gas station at Lodge, I made my move. Suddenly, I turned sharply and accelerated towards the parking lot. The man staggered in his seat. "What the hell are you doing?" "I'm sorry," I lied. "I thought I saw an animal." In the eye, slammed the road, opened the door, and ran to the gas station store. I could hear his heavy footsteps following me. I pushed the glass door so hard that I almost pulled it out of its frame. The clerk behind the counter, a sleepy boy in a baseball cap, was startled. "Please, Jade calls the police. That man threatened me. He has something in his bag." The clerk barely had time to react before the door slammed open again. The passenger was there without his hood. His face was contorted. "You shouldn't have done that," he growled. reached into his sweatshirt and pulled out a gun. The clerk ducked behind the counter muttering frantically into the phone, but I only saw the barrel of the gun pointed at me. "Now you're going back to the car and we'll leave without tricks. Got it?" I nodded slowly, my mind working at full speed outside. In the distance I saw something, red and blue lights. The police, the man also saw them. Eyes widened with alarm. He whispered before he could react. Someone made an unexpected move. The clerk who had disappeared behind the counter reappeared with a baseball bat. "Leave her alone," she screamed. The man turned his gun towards him. I seized the moment, stepped on his foot with all my might and wrenched from his grip. The gun wobbled swinging in his hand. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran, I pushed the back door of the store, and I went out into an alley. The sirens were deafening. Now I ran towards the light, towards the security. The police arrived just in time. I heard screams. I saw the officers pounce on the man. Minutes later he was handcuffed on the ground, shaking from head to toe. An officer came to me. "It's okay." I nodded, although I wasn't sure if it was true. I later learned the truth about my passenger was a fugitive. The bag in the back seat contained stolen money and an extra gun. If I hadn't fled to the gas station, I probably wouldn't have made it out alive after that night. I never went back to Uber. I couldn't even drive for a while. But little by little, with therapy and the support of my loved ones, I started to heal. I still get nightmares sometimes, but when I see an Uber go through on the street, I pray silently for the driver, because you never know who might be getting into your car. And sometimes the most dangerous journeys are the ones where you should never have accepted the moment the lights went out. I knew it wouldn't be an ordinary babysitting night, but I could never have imagined the terror that awaited me in the dark. It was supposed to be an easy job. They were regulars, and their children, Ian, 8, and Lily's, were generally well behaved. I had looked after them a few times a month for the last year, and it had always been very simple. Movie night, a few board games, and then putting them to bed before spending the rest of the night checking my phone on their comfy couch. That Friday night started like any other. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, they went to their appointment around 7 p.m., leaving me instructions that the children should be in bed at 9 o'clock. We ordered pizza, we watched a Disney movie, and even let them stay up for half an hour more as a small prize while I took them upstairs to brush their teeth. It happened a moment. The house was lit with the soft light of the lamps and the distant murmur of the TV that I had left on downstairs. The next one, we were plunged into total darkness. I didn't complain. Ian, the light went out. I felt my phone using his to light up the hallway. It seems that, yes, friend, don't worry, for sure he'll be back soon. We're going to bed. Okay. Lily clung to my leg, her small and trembling voice. "I don't like the dark." Emma knelt me down where I helped them put on their pajamas with the light of the phone. I found a couple of battery-powered flashlights in their closets. Clearly the Millers were prepared for situations like this. Once the kids were settled in, I told them to stay in bed while I went downstairs to check the fuse box. As I descended the stairs, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house felt different in the dark. Familiar shapes transformed into menacing shadows. I tried to laugh of my own fear. I was 17 years old, for God's sake, too big to be scared of the dark. The fuse box was in the basement, which was already creepy enough with the light on in the dark. It was absolutely terrifying. Every creak of the wooden steps made my heart race. A little more orderly looking for the fuse box. It was then that I heard a thud on the floor upstairs, followed from the sound of footsteps. I froze. Using my ears. It had to be one of the kids, right? Probably Ian trying to sneak away to watch TV or steal cookies, but something in that sound made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. The steps were too heavy, too deliberate to belong to an 8-year-old boy. "Ian," I called with a trembling voice, even to my own ears. "Lily, is you?" There was no answer. Alone, more footsteps moving from room to room above me. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone to call the police with no signal. Of course I was in the basement. After all, I would have to go upstairs to make the call. While I went upstairs quietly, my mind was going over the possibilities. Maybe Mr. Miller had come back early to check on how we were doing because of the blackout. Maybe it was a neighbor coming to offer help. But deep down I knew those were just comforting lies I was telling myself. I reached the top of the stairs and opened the door cautiously, peeking into the dark kitchen. Footsteps had stopped. But now I could hear something else. Heavy breathing, ragged, was coming from the living room just around the corner. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst in my chest. Soaps. I could run to the front door, but that would mean leaving Anan and Lily behind. The very thought turned my stomach number. I had to get to the children. Tom took a deep breath, plucked up the courage, and ran through the kitchen to the stairs. As soon as I moved, I heard a gasp of breath in the living room, followed by quick steps. Whoever was in the house had heard me. I went upstairs 2 at a time. 2 with my legs burning from the effort behind me. The intruder chased me. His heavy footsteps echoing in the darkness, I reached the end of the corridor and ran towards the children's rooms. Ethan, Lily, I screamed without caring any more. The stealth, get up, we have to go. I slammed Ian's door open and found him sitting on the bed with his eyes bulging with fear. Emma, what's going on? There's no time for explanations. Jade, taking him by the hand and getting him out of bed. We have to find your sister and leave. We hurried to Lily's room where we found her curled up under the covers sobbing silently. I picked her up in my arms, balanced Wave on my hip while I squeezed Ian's hand tightly. Listen to me, I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the panic that flooded me. There is someone in the house. We have to be very quiet and very brave. Okay, let's go out the window and run to the neighbor's house. Can they do that for me? They both nodded, their pale faces in the dim light of the flashlight. The intruder was already on the stairs, getting closer and closer. I opened the window and thanked my stars that the Miller's house was a single story. I helped Etten get out first. Run to the Johnson's house, I ordered him, pointing to the house 2 doors down. Knock on the door and tell them to call the police. Don't stop for nothing. Understand? Aina nodded with eyes full of tears. I passed to Lily and then started to come out myself. It was then that I felt a hand cling to my ankle. I screamed, kicking in desperation as they dragged me back inside. Run! I screamed at the children, begging because they managed to get to safety. I turned and found myself face to face with my attacker in the dim street light. I made out a face twisted in a grotesque smile. He was wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt, and in his hand I saw the flash of a knife. Wow, wow! He murmured in a low and threatening voice. What a brave babysitter! I threw myself at him with all my might, my fist connecting with his jaw. Staggered, momentarily stunned, and took the opportunity, grabbed the lamp from Lily's bedside table and threw it with all my might, hitting him on the side of the head. The intruder fell to the ground with force, the knife slipping from his hand. I didn't wait to see if it would get up. I threw myself towards the window, crawling through it and landing on the wet grass of the Millers. In the distance I saw Ian and Lily desperately knocking on the door of the Johnsons. Relief flooded me knowing they were safe now. I just had to worry about myself. I ran, my legs burning with every step behind me. I heard the sound of broken glass. The intruder had jumped out of the window and was chasing me. Just as I reached the sidewalk, a couple of lights illuminated the street. A car was approaching. It was my only chance. I threw myself into the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically. The car slammed on the brakes and I almost cried with relief when I saw that it was a police car. 2 officers immediately got out, hands on their weapons. Help! I screamed, pointing towards the house. A man came in. He has a knife. One of the officers ran towards me while the other was talking quickly on his radio, calling for reinforcements in the distance. The sound of sirens filled the air. The next few hours were a blur. More cops arrived and searched the house and surrounding area. They found the unconscious intruder in the Miller's backyard. Apparently he had tried to jump near her and had passed out in the process. Ethan and Lily were safe with the Johnsons, terrified but unharmed. Mr. and Mrs. Miller arrived shortly thereafter to finding their house turned into a crime scene. They hugged me tightly, thanking me through tears for protecting their children. I sat in the back of an ambulance, a thermal blanket over my shoulders. I couldn't stop shaking. Adrenaline was fading, and the weight of what had happened, of what could have happened, was becoming more and more real. Later, the police told me that the man I was a criminal with a history of burglaries. I had deliberately cut off the electricity, planning to break in. I didn't expect anyone to be in the house. For the next few weeks I suffered nightmares and anxiety. Every creak in my own house, every unexpected shadow made my heart soar. But little by little, with the help of therapy and the support of my family and the Millers, I began to heal. I am still taking care of Ian and Lily. Believe it or not, the Millers installed a state-of-the-art security system after the incident, which gives me some peace of mind. Ian and Lily see me as some sort of superhero now, which is both heartwarming and a little embarrassing. But most importantly, I learned something about myself that night when I faced real danger. I didn't freeze or run away. I protected those kids with everything what I had. That certainty gives me strength even on the darkest nights when memories threaten to overwhelm me. 'Cause now I know that even in the face of true terror I'm stronger than I ever imagined, and that's a light that no blackout can extinguish. I never thought I'd fear the dark again, but when your neighbor only goes out at night and drags suspicious packages, even the bravest would start sleeping with the lights on. It all started when I moved into my new apartment in the city, after years of sharing spaces with roommates. I finally had a place to myself. The building was old with character, as the realtor had described it. This meant creaky floors and noisy pipes, but I didn't care. It was my home. The first few weeks were normal until I noticed my neighbor across the street. I never saw it during the day. I only heard him come out late at night, tall, slim, with dark hair, always a little disheveled, but what troubled me the most were his intense dark eyes, as if looking through you. At first I thought he simply had a night schedule, but over time I noticed strange things: the heavy curtains always closed, the strange metallic smell that sometimes emanated from his door, and worst of all, the sounds coming from his apartment at night: scratches, dull thuds, and once what I swore was a gasp. I tried to convince myself that it was nothing. But then one night I saw him coming back late from a party, something drunk. When I found him in the hallway, he was struggling with a big black bag. Our eyes met in his gaze. There was something furious, as if he had surprised me at a time when he didn't. Before I could say anything, he hurried downstairs. The next morning, the police were outside the building. A woman had disappeared in the area. I froze at the memory of the bag. It was possible that I didn't know, but fear made me stay silent. The following weeks I watched him more closely, kept a record of his schedules, of the sounds, of the smells. I was more and more convinced that my neighbor was hiding something. One night I saw him dragging another bag, but it moved and small muffled sounds came out of it. My heart raced. It was the proof I needed. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but then something fell from the bag, a meow. The cats escaped running down the hallway. My neighbor looked at me, sighed. "I can explain it." And he did it over a cup of coffee, with kittens climbing up our legs. Told the truth. He was a night veterinarian. He rescued stray animals. He hid them because the building had a no-pet policy. The metallic smell was of medical supplies. The screams I heard were cats in heat. The black bag from the night he disappeared. The woman was a pregnant cat that he took to the emergency clinic. I felt like a complete idiot. I apologized for my suspicions. But he alone. "Rio, I understand," he said. "I'm not the best neighbor." We became friends. I helped him convince the landlord to change the pet policy. Today our building is full of rescue cats and dogs, and every time I think of the nights when I thought I was living next to a serial killer, I can't help laughing. Because sometimes the monsters in the dark are nothing more than weird guys with a huge heart. The pungent smell of the burnt rubber still haunts me. Was the first thing I noticed when his truck pulled up next to my broken-down car. Long before I saw the dark spots that would change everything, I had been driving for hours through the endless desert landscape of Arizona. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky with shades of orange and purple, when my car decided to give out. A rattle in the engine, a cloud of smoke coming out of the hood, and suddenly I was rolling slowly to a forced stop on the shoulder of the road. Great, just what I needed. I got out of the car and lifted the hood. Although I might as well have been looking at an alien machine, I had no idea what I was seeing or how to fix it. I pulled out my phone to call a tow truck, but there was no signal, of course. It was then that I heard the roar of an engine approaching, an old pickup truck, and behind my car, a good Samaritan in the middle of nowhere. Seemed too good to be true. It turned out it was. The driver's door squeaked open, and a man slowly stepped down, high and thin, with suntanned skin and mirrored sunglasses hiding his eyes, walked with a slight limp, wiping his hands on a dirty rag. He asked with voice rough but friendly. I nodded, pointing to the steaming engine. "Yes, it just went out. I have no idea what happened." "He knows something about cars." He smiled slightly and walked over to look. "I've been working with engines since I was a kid. Let's see what happens." As he leaned over the engine, a chill ran down my spine. That smell wasn't just the burnt rubber. There was something else underneath. Something metallic, sweet, something that shouldn't be there. "Looks like the radiator hose broke," he said, after a moment. "It's not something I can fix here, but I can take you to the next town. There's a workshop there that can help you." Hesitant would be to stay and wait for help, but with night falling and no signal on my phone, how long would it take for someone to get through? The man seemed friendly enough and didn't have many options. "That would be great," I said. "Thanks. No problem. My name is Tom, by the way." "Sarah," I lied, for some reason feeling uncomfortable when I told him my real name. I gave him a quick handshake, and I felt something sticky on his palm, dark spots under his nails, motor oil or so I wanted to think. I followed to take to his truck and opened the passenger door, and it was then when I saw him in the back of the truck. In the bed there was a big dark stain. It was glowing faintly in the evening light, too red for oil. My stomach churned. I swallowed and pointed with a vague gesture. "That's it." Tom glanced quickly over his shoulder and smiled. "I spilled some oil this morning." Then with a wink he added, "Don't worry, it's not going to stain your clothes, every fiber of my being. I was telling me to run, but my feet didn't move. My logic told me to run. I was exaggerating. I had no proof of anything, just my gut, and I was taught that distrusting strangers was rude. So I smiled nervously, got into the van and closed the door. The van started, and as we pulled it away from the rain against the windshield, I clenched my hands on my knees, trying to ignore the growing discomfort in my stomach. "So what brings you here?" Sarah asked, Tom suddenly with a nonchalant tone. I jumped hearing my name. Well, the name I'd given it, and I forced a smile. Just one road trip. I wanted to disconnect a little. Thomas felt slowly, as if savoring my words. "Oh yes, people usually come to the desert to get lost or to find each other." The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. I looked out the window, watching the dark road. There were no houses. There were no road signs, only infinite desert. I swallowed hard, forcing them behind those reflective sunglasses. "You could say that I like to move. The road is my home." His hand rested on the steering wheel, but I noticed how the other one fiddled with something in his jacket pocket. A piece of dark, dirty cloth, the same rag he had wiped his hands with before. Now I could see that he was soaked with something. It wasn't oil. Heavy in the cab of the truck. I had to get out of there. "Hey, it's a long way to go to the city?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Tom tilted his head as if he were considering it. "Not much," but something in his tone made me doubt. The road seemed to have no end. There were no lights in the distance, nothing to indicate that we were approaching some town. And then, without upon warning, he turned sharply to the right, veering off the main road. The truck bounced off the dirt road, and the darkness seemed to close even more around us. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice now sharp with fear. Tom smiled. "I'm going to take you to a more private place." My stomach plummeted. I desperately searched for the door handle. It was unlocked. Jump, but what if I got hurt, and if I couldn't run fast enough? Tom must have noticed my panic, because before I could react, his hand closed tightly around my wrist. "Don't do anything stupid, Sarah." Her voice was calm, but there was something cruel about her. My heart was beating so hard that I had to feel it in my ears. I had to do something without thinking. I took the soaked rag that hung from his pocket and threw it against his face. The smell hit me immediately. Metallic, copper, blood. Tom grunted and loosened his grip in surprise. I seized the moment with all the strength I had. I elbowed him in the face and turned the door handle. The truck was going at high speed, but I had no choice. I jumped the impact against the ground. It was brute. I rolled on the earth and the stones, feeling how my skin was scraped and my bones creaked with the blow. But I got up, ignoring the pain. I began to run. After me, I heard the screech of the brakes of the truck. Tom had stopped the vehicle and was coming for me. I ran like never before in my life. My lungs burned. My legs protested. But the fear made me. I was pushing forward. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to keep running. Then in the distance I saw lights, headlights, a car coming down the main road. I put everything I had left into one last desperate run. I pulled off the dirt road. I stumbled onto the road and waved my arms frantically. The car slammed on the brakes. A man rolled down his window, his face full of confusion. "Help!" I screamed. "Please help me!" He looked behind me and frowned. I turned. Tom was standing at the entrance to the dirt road. Looking at me, his expression was calm, as if he knew something I didn't, and then he just smiled, turned around, got into his truck and disappeared into the night. The police took my statement, but they never found Tom or his truck. Nothing was like it had never existed. The only thing they found was my car broken down in the same place where I had left it. The authorities assumed I was imagining things, that stress and fear had made me exaggerate the story. But I know the truth. Tom was out there waiting, looking for his next victim. Because that's what he did and would continue to do it. Sometimes when I'm alone on the road, I see a truck in my rearview mirror, an old, dusty truck. I never get it. I get close enough to see the driver, but every time it happens I get that same smell, burnt rubber, and I know Tom is still out there hunting, waiting for someone else to make the same mistake as me, waiting for someone to stop. The first time I saw her standing in my bedroom window, I thought she was dreaming. By the third night I knew she was living a nightmare. It had been a month since I moved into my new apartment, a cozy studio apartment on the 4th floor of an old building in downtown Chicago. Rent was surprisingly affordable for the area, which should have been my first sign that something wasn't quite right. But I was too excited about my new job and the prospect of living in the heart of the city to question my good fortune. They were quiet. I settled into a routine. decorated my space, and explored the neighborhood. I loved the character of the old building, the creaky hardwood floors, the ornamental molds, the large windows that let in lots of natural light. It felt like home. Then on a cold fall night I woke up suddenly with the feeling that someone was watching me. My eyes slammed open, and there she was, a woman standing at the foot of my bed, silhouetted against the window. I froze, my heart hammering on my chest. She didn't move, she didn't speak, she just stood there, looking at me. I must have blinked, because in the next instant she was gone. I sat up suddenly. I turned on the lamp at night, and I looked around in despair. My apartment was empty. The door was still locked, the windows closed. I convinced myself that it had been a vivid dream from stress and an overactive imagination. The next night happened again. This time I was sure I was awake. The woman appeared next to my closet, her form blurred and indistinct but undeniably present. I tried to talk, ask her who she was or what she wanted, but my voice failed me again, disappeared in the blink of an eye. By the third night it was a bundle of nerves. I hadn't slept well in days, startled, sound, and I considered my landlord or even the police. But what would I tell them? That I was being haunted by a ghost? They would think I was crazy that night as I lay in bed, every muscle tense with anticipation. I heard it, a soft shuffling sound coming from the living room. My breath jammed in my throat. Slowly I carefully reached for my phone on the bedside table, my fingers trembling. They found the flashlight, and I turned it on, casting an ace of light across the room. There she was, standing in my bedroom door. In the hard light of my phone I could see her clearly for the first time. She was young, maybe in her 20s, with long dark hair and pale skin. She was wearing an antique nightgown, torn and stained. But it was her eyes that tormented me, wide supplicants, filled with a sadness so deep it made my heart ache. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She raised a hand, urgently pointing to something behind me. I turned following her gesture, but saw nothing but the wall of my room. When I looked back at her, she had vanished the next day. I couldn't concentrate on work. My mind kept replaying the encounters, trying to make sense of them. I was going crazy, or my apartment really was haunted. During my lunch break, I decided to investigate the history of the building. What I found ran cold in my blood. In 1928, a young woman named Emily Carter had lived in my apartment. She had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Her body was never found. The case caused a stir at the time, with rumors of foul play and cover-ups, but over time, like all sensations, it faded from the public memory. When I saw the blurry photo of Emily Carter in an old newspaper, my blood froze. It was her, the woman in my apartment that night. I waited for her. I didn't try. I didn't even get into bed. I sat in the living room with the lights on, determined to face whatever was going on. Around midnight, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came out in visible clouds, and I felt the skin stand on end in my arms. Then it appeared. This time it didn't disappear. It stood there looking at me with those sad eyes, its shape flickering like a candle flame. "Emily," I said softly. Emily Carter nodded, an expression of relief crossing her face. "What do you want? Why are you here?" She pointed again, this time to my room. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling. "Do you want me to go there?" Another nod. I walked towards my room, with Emily's ghost following me silently. Once inside, he pointed to the wall behind my bed. I walked over with my hands over the worn wallpaper. There was something strange about it. A slight bulge, barely noticeable unless you looked for it. With trembling fingers, we peeled it off. Cheering me up, holding my breath, I opened the small door. Inside there was a space the size of a shoebox, and in that space a wad of yellowed papers tied with a faded ribbon. When I pulled it out, Emily's form began to fade. But before she disappeared completely, I saw a smile on her face, a smile of gratitude and relief. The papers turned out to be Emily's diary, and a series of letters told a story of love, betrayal, and murder. Emily had had an affair with a married man, a prominent businessman in the city. When she threatened to reveal their relationship, he killed her and hid her body. The last diary entry detailed his plan to hide evidence of their affair in the wall of his apartment. In case something happened to him the next day, I took the papers to the police. The case that had been filed for almost a century was reopened. Forensic teams searched my apartment and finally found Emily's remains hidden in the walls of the basement of the building. Her long-dead killer was posthumously charged with her murder. Emily's family, her great-nieces and great-nephews, were finally able to give her a proper burial. As for me, I never saw Emily's ghost again after that night, but sometimes when I am alone in my apartment, I feel a presence. Not terrifying or unsettling, but comforting, as if someone is taking care of me. grateful for having helped him find the peace. The day my neighbor disappeared was the day I realized that the quiet suburb I lived in hid secrets darker than I could have ever imagined. I had lived on Maple Street for nearly a decade in a tidy little house with a white fence, the perfect picture of suburban life. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had been there even longer. She was a kind widow of 70. So many years, always willing to offer a warm smile and a plate of freshly baked cookies. Over time we had developed a comfortable routine. I would mow her lawn and she would thank me with a homemade cake. It was Tuesday, when I noticed something was not right. Mrs. Henderson's newspapers were piling up on her porch and her normally spotless garden was starting to look unkempt. Worried, I knocked on her door, but there was no answer. Car was still in the driveway, so I knew she hadn't gone on a trip. I decided to call the police for a welfare check, more out of caution than real concern. Mrs. Henderson was independent, but she was getting older. Maybe she had fallen and couldn't get to the phone. When the police arrived, they found the house empty. There were no signs of forced entry. There were no signs of a struggle, just empty, as if Mrs. Henderson would simply have vanished into thin air. The next few days they were a whirlwind of activity. Police cars came and went. Neighbors gathered in small groups to murmur and speculate. I was interviewed several times as I was the one who reported her missing, but I had no answers. Only a growing sense of unease that grew with each day that passed. A week after Mrs. Henderson's disappearance, I began to notice other strange things in the neighborhood. The Johnsons, who lived on the other side of the street. They packed up their things and moved in the middle of the night. Without saying goodbye, Mr. Alberti, always punctual, stopped going for a run in the mornings. A new family moved into the old house of the Millers, but they never went to the neighborhood activities. They always had the windows covered and avoided any kind of interaction. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. People move all the time. I said to myself, routines change. There was nothing sinister about the new neighbors wanting privacy, but I couldn't ignore the throbbing sensation in the back of my neck, the feeling that something was very, very wrong. One night, unable to sleep, I stared out my bedroom window at Mrs. Henderson's dark house. It was then that I saw him, a slight movement behind one of the curtains. My heart skipped a beat. I had returned, or there was someone else inside her house. Without thinking, I grabbed a flashlight and headed there. The smart thing would have been to call the police again, but curiosity and concern overcame my good judgment. When I got to her door, I noticed that it was slightly ajar. Mrs. Henderson. I knocked softly, pushing the door open more. The house was dark and quiet, but there was a smell in the air, a smell of damp and something else somewhat stale. I moved my flashlight's ace of light around the living room. Everything seemed to be in place. There was no sign of theft or anyone living there. I advanced cautiously. The floorboards creaked under my feet. In the kitchen I found a half-empty teacup on the counter, with a thin layer of moo floating on the surface. It was as if Mrs. Henderson had interrupted his morning routine and simply disappeared. As I turned to leave, my flashlight shone something on the floor, a trapdoor partially hidden under a carpet. In all the years I'd known Mrs. Henderson, I never knew I had a basement entrance inside the house. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle. Every horror movie I'd ever seen screamed in my head to turn around, but I had to know the truth. The trapdoor opened with a groan, revealing a steep staircase that descended into the darkness. The smell that came from there was unbearable: damp earth, moo, and something else, somewhat putrid. Hello, I called in a trembling voice. There is someone down there. There was no response, only the sound of water droplets falling in the distance. I took a deep breath and began to lower my flashlight, trembling in my hand as I explored. The basement was larger than I expected, with raw stone walls, instead of the typical concrete. It looked old, much older than the house. Then I saw them: symbols carved on the walls, drawings painted on the floor with what seemed to be dried blood, circles, stars, angular runes that I did not recognize. In the center of the room there was a stone altar, its surface darkened by stains. My mind struggled to understand what I was seeing. Mrs. Henderson, my sweet neighbor who bakes cookies, was involved in some kind of occult ritual. It seemed impossible. A noise behind me spun me around with a wild heart. There were a group of people standing at the bottom of the stairs. I recognized some: Mr. Bernardi, the Johnsons, even the new family of the Miller house, but their faces were different, now cold, expressionless, and in front, in a black robe adorned with the same symbols on the walls, was Mrs. Henderson. "We've been waiting for you, my dear," she said in a voice lacking the warmth she used to have. "We knew you'd come eventually. It's always been so curious." I stepped back, bumping into the altar. "What's this going on?" Mrs. Henderson smiled. But it wasn't the kind smile she knew. She was predatory, hungry. "This, dear, is the true heart of our community. We have been here for centuries, maintaining the old ways, feeding the powers that sleep underneath." The others began to surround me in a circle. I heard them murmur a low, guttural chant in a language I did not understand. "Every so often," Mrs. Henderson continued, coming closer, "we need new blood to keep the ritual going." I realized with horror what it meant. The missing neighbors, the sudden moves. I don't know, they had gone. They had been sacrificed, and now it was my turn. As they closed the circle around me, I did the only thing I could think of. I pressed the lantern with both hands and struck it with all my might against Mrs. Henderson's head. There was a dull crack, and she fell to the ground. The chant stopped immediately for a moment. Everyone stood motionless, stunned at the interruption of her ritual. I wasted no time. I threw myself towards the stairs, climbing with an adrenaline that I had never felt before. Hands tried to hold me, but I was writhing like a madman, knocking down chairs and furniture. In my desperation to reach the front door, I slammed it open and shot out into the street without daring to look back behind me. I heard screams and hurried footsteps, but I didn't stop. I ran to the police station panting, and with my eyes bulging. The next few hours were chaos. I tried to explain what I had seen, but the officers looked at me in disbelief. When they finally decided to investigate, it was morning. When they entered Mrs. Henderson's house, they found the basement. But the altar was clean. The walls were bare. There were no symbols. There were no traces of dried blood, and strangest of all, there was no trace of Mrs. Henderson or the other members of the cult. It was as if they had never existed. But things didn't end there. As the police investigated, they discovered other secrets buried in the neighborhood. Hidden rooms in other houses filled with evidence of dark rituals, mass graves in the woods behind Maple Street. The bodies were so dilapidated that no one could determine how many years they had been there. What they did know was that disappearances in the area dated back decades, maybe even centuries, and the cult had apparently disappeared into thin air. They never found Mrs. Henderson. They never found the Johnsons. They never found Mr. Abernathy. And yet sometimes on the quietest nights, when the whole neighborhood was asleep, I felt myself being watched. I saw shadows moving among the empty houses. I heard whispers in the dark. I couldn't stay, after all I had seen. I couldn't live in Maple Street as if nothing had happened. I would have gone through Empiqueria where I could start over, but memories haunted me in my dreams. I saw Mrs. Henderson's twisted smile. I heard the guttural chant of the cultists. I felt my hands trying to hold me in the dark, and worst of all, sometimes when I walk through my new neighborhood I see someone who looks too much like the Johnsons or Mrs. Hendersons, always different but the same. I wonder if they found me. I wonder if they're waiting for the right time. Because now I know the truth. Evil can hide behind friendly smiles and white fences. Monsters don't always live in abandoned or gloomy caves. Sometimes they live across the street baking cookies, patiently waiting for their next victim. The moment I discovered that hidden room, I knew my teacher wasn't just an eccentric, he was dangerous. But by then it was too late. It was supposed to be an easy job. Professor Blackwood, my favorite professor in the psychology department, had asked me to take care of his house while attending a congress in Europe for 2 weeks in his huge Victorian house, surrounded by books and antiques, with the sole responsibility of feeding his cat and watering his plants for a penniless college student like me. It was a dream come true. In the early days they were quiet. I explored the Marvel House with the professor's impressive library and his collection of rare objects from around the world. There were tribal masks from Africa, ornate daggers from the Middle East, and delicate porcelain figurines from China. Each room was like a small museum. Everything changed on my 4th night. There I was curled up in the professor's study, flipping through one of his rare books on abnormal psychology, when I heard a thud coming from somewhere above me. I stood still, listening to the house. It was old, I said to myself. It was probably just settling down. But then I heard it louder again. This time it seemed to come from the attic. With my heart racing, I took a heavy flashlight from the desk drawer and climbed the creaking stairs to the 3rd floor. The attic door is at the end of a long hallway, partially hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. As I approached, I heard a soft scratching sound behind the door. My palms were sweaty when I grabbed the knob, hoping it was closed, but it turned easily. The attic was full of boxes and old furniture, all covered by a thick layer of dust. The ace of my flashlight pierced the gloom, casting long, crooked shadows all over the room. At first I didn't see anything strange. but as I went further I noticed something strange in one of the rooms. Walls a thin line that formed the outline of a hidden door, almost invisible if you weren't looking for it. My curiosity overcame my fear. I ran my hands over the wall looking for some kind of mechanism. When pressing a particular point, I heard a soft click. The secret door opened. The room behind it was small, maybe 3 per tr, and unlike the rest of the attic, it was spotless. The walls were lined with filing cabinets, and in the center there was a desk covered with papers and photographs. I got closer. The air became heavy on my lungs. The photos were of students, dozens of them. Some I recognized from my classes, others I had seen on campus, but their expressions were all empty-looking, their eyes unfocused, as if they were in a trance. With trembling hands, I opened one of the files on the desk. Inside, I found detailed notes written in Professor Blackwood's neat handwriting. They described experiments, techniques of mental manipulation, something called cognitive restructuring. As I read more, I realized with horror that they were not just theoretical studies. The professor had been experimenting with his own students. He was so absorbed in the documents that I hardly heard the door. Professor Blackwood was not supposed to return until the following week. In a hurry, I put the file back in its place and closed the secret door carefully. But in my haste, I knocked down the photos, fell to the floor, and there, among them, I saw my own face in the photo. I had the same empty look as the others. The sound of footsteps going up the stairs brought me back to reality. I got out of there now. I got out of the attic as quickly and quietly as I could. As soon as I got to the hallway, when I heard Professor Sarah's voice, "You're up there?" His tone was affable, but with a tinge of something else, a little cold. I took a deep breath and forced a smile before answering. "Yes, Professor, I thought I heard something in the attic, probably just the cat." Professor Blackwood appeared at the end of the hallway. His expression was that of there was something calculating about them, something that made my skin crawl. "You found something interesting?" he asked with a casual smile. I shook my head quickly. "Not just old boxes." He nodded slowly and took a step towards me. "He's always been one of my brightest students, Sarah, so perceptive, so curious." Another step. I backed away. He hit the attic door. "I've been watching you for a long time," he continued. "You'd be an excellent candidate for the next phase of my research." My mind was working at full speed. "Looking for a way out research?" I asked, feigning ignorance of what it's about. Her smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "Oh, I think you know." Her hand moved towards my face. "Don't worry," she whispered. "It won't hurt much." Panic took hold of me in a desperate movement. I ducked and ran under her arm. I went down the stairs, speeding, listening to his heavy footsteps behind me. I came to the front door, struggling with the scabbard. Suddenly, I felt his hand on my arm, pulling me back. "Don't make this difficult, Sarah." His voice was a poisonous sizzle, waiting for some neighbor to hear me. The house was isolated. No one would come to help me. In a last act of desperation, I grabbed one of the tribal masks from the wall, and I hit her against her head with all my might. There was a snap. The teacher staggered, letting her go. The scandal that followed uncovered horrors and unthinkable. Dozens of students had been victims of her experiments. Some recovered, others were damaged forever. I spent months in therapy trying to process what had happened. Sometimes I wondered, she had already started her work on me. There were gaps in my memory that I couldn't remember. I was transferring to another university the next semester, but I never trusted my professors in the same way again, because I now knew the truth. Monsters don't always lurk in the dark. Sometimes they're standing in front of a blackboard, teaching you with a smile on their face, hiding their true nature behind an air of authority. And the next time, the victim could be anyone. The day my neighbor disappeared was the day when I realized that the quiet suburb I called home harbored secrets darker than I could have ever imagined. I had lived on Maple Street for nearly a decade in a tidy little house with a white fence, the epitome of suburban life. My neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had been there even longer. She was a kind widow in her 70s, always ready with a warm smile and a plate of cookies. Over time, we had developed a comfortable routine. I would mow her lawn and she would bring me a homemade cake. As a thank you, it was on a Tuesday when I noticed something was not right. Mrs. Henderson's newspapers were piling up on her porch, and her yard generally well maintained. She was starting to look sloppy, worried. I knocked on her door, but there was no answer. Her car was still in the driveway, so I knew that she hadn't traveled. I called the police to ask for a welfare check, more out of caution than real concern. Mrs. Henderson was independent, But she was getting older, and I thought maybe she had fallen and couldn't reach the phone. When the police arrived, they found the house empty. There were no signs of forced entry. There were no signs of a struggle. It was just empty, as if Mrs. Henderson had disappeared into thin air. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Police cars came and went. Neighbors gathered in small groups to gossip and speculate. I was interviewed several times, and I was the one who had reported her missing. But I had no answers. Only a growing sense of unease that intensified with each passing day or so. After Mrs. Henderson's disappearance, I began to notice other strange things in the neighborhood. The Johnsons across the street suddenly packed their bags and moved in the middle of the night without saying goodbye. The always punctual Mr. Abba Bernati stopped going for a run in the mornings, and a new family moved into the old house of the Millers. They never interacted with each other. Their windows were always covered, and they never participated in neighborhood activities. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid. People were mute all the time. I told myself, routines change. There was nothing sinister about new neighbors wanting privacy, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was very, very wrong. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself looking out of my bedroom window at Mrs. Henderson's dark house. Then, when I saw a flash of movement behind one of the curtains, my heart jumped to my throat. I had come back, or someone else was inside. Without thinking too much about it, grabbed a flashlight and went out onto the porch. What I would have sensed would have been to call the police again. But curiosity and concern overcame my best judgment. As I approached the front door, I noticed that it was ajar. Mrs. Henderson knocked softly, pushing the door a little further. The house was dark and quiet, but a strange smell hung in the air. It was a stench, stale and damp, that wasn't there before. I pointed my flashlight around the living room. Everything seemed to be in place, with no signs of theft or invasion. I went deeper into the house, the wooden floors creaking under my feet. On the floor, I found a half-drunk cup of tea on the counter, with a thin layer of mousse floating on the surface. It was as if Mrs. Henderson had risen in the middle of her morning routine, and she just would have faded away. When I turned to leave, my flashlight shone something on the floor, a trapdoor partially hidden under a rug. In all the years I'd known Mrs. Henderson, I never knew her house had a basement entrance. From the inside, my hand trembled as I reached for the handle. Every horror movie I'd ever seen screamed at me to turn around, get out of there, and call the police, but I had to know. The trapdoor opened with a groan, revealing a steep staircase descending into the darkness. The smell that emerged was overwhelming: wet earth, moo, and something else somewhat rotten. Hello, I called with a trembling voice. There is someone. There was no answer, just the sound of water dripping in the distance. I took a deep breath and started to go down the steps, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The basement was more large than I expected. The walls were of rough stone, not concrete. As in modern cellars, it seemed ancient, much older than the house itself. And then I saw the symbols on the walls, painted on the floor with what appeared to be dried blood, circles, stars, angular runes that I did not recognize. In the center of the room there was a large stone altar. Its surface was stained a dark red color. My Mrs. Henderson, my sweet cookie-baking neighbor, involved in some kind of occult ritual, seemed impossible. A noise behind me made me spin, my heart pounding. There at the bottom of the stairs was a group of people. I recognized some of them: the Lord Bernati, the Johnsons, even the new family of the Miller's house, but their faces were different now, cold, expressionless. At the front of the group, dressed in a black hue adorned with the same symbols on the walls, there was Mrs. Henderson. "We've been waiting for you, darling," she said in a voice devoid of the warmth she used to have. She stepped forward. "We knew you'd come. Eventually. It's always been so curious." I leaned back, crashing into the altar. "What's this going on?" Mrs. Henderson smiled, but it wasn't his usual kind smile. This was predatory, hungry. "This, my dear, it's the true heart of our community." The others began to move in a circle around me. I could hear him whisper a low, guttural chant in a language I didn't understand. Every so often, Mrs. Henderson continued, drawing closer, "we need new blood to keep the ritual going. We usually attract strangers, but we don't need new blood to keep the ritual going. Sometimes, when the powers that be, we have to look closer to home." Horror hit me hard. The neighbors gone. The sudden movements had not gone away. They had been sacrificed, and now it was my turn. As the circle closed around me, I did all I could think of, pressed the flashlight tightly in my hands, and threw it with all my might against Mrs. Henderson's head. The creaking, it was frightening. She fell to the side with a muffled groan, and the singing stopped abruptly for a second. Everyone was Paralyzed by surprise, I took advantage of the moment. I threw myself towards the stairs, feeling hands trying to grab me. Some nails dug into my arm, but I was twisting. I ran upstairs, my heart beating so hard that I thought it would explode. I went through the basement door. I slammed it shut and ran towards the street. The screams and the sound of footsteps chasing me made me run even faster, without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the police station, panting with bulging eyes. The next few hours were a tangle of questions, disbelief, and finally action. When the police raided Mrs. Henderson's house, they found the basement exactly as she had described it. But the altar was clean, the symbols had been erased, and there was no trail of Mrs. Henderson or the other neighbors. The following days revealed even more horrors. Other houses on Maple Street hid hidden rooms with evidence of rituals. They found mass graves in the woods, behind the neighborhood. The conspiracy was deeper than anyone had imagined, involving even local officials and police who had been covering up the crimes for decades. I couldn't stay in that house. Everything that had happened, I moved away, trying to leave it all behind, but memories haunt me. I still see Mrs. Henderson's face in my nightmares, her crooked smile and her empty eyes. I still hear the singing. I feel the hands clinging to me in the dark. Now I look at my new neighbors with suspicion, what secrets they hide behind their kind smiles and perfectly manicured gardens. 'Cause now I know the truth, that evil, it doesn't always hide in the dark. Sometimes it hides in plain sight, disguised as kindness and cookies. So I stay alert, always watching, always ready, because you never know when the facade cracks, revealing the terrifying reality that lurks underneath. I always thought that a locked door meant security, but as I stood there with the key shaking in my hand, I knew that what I was waiting for on the other side would change my life forever. It all started when my best friend Lily asked me to take care of her house while she was leaving on a 2-week business trip. I had been to her apartment dozens of times before. A cozy 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet part of the city seemed like the perfect opportunity to get away from my small studio and enjoy a little bit of the first few days were normal. I worked from her dining room. I enjoyed long baths in its elegant bathtub and caught up on several series on its huge TV. But on the 4th night something changed. I was getting ready for sleep when I heard a slight knock coming from the door of the guest room. I froze, listening intently. There I was again, followed by what sounded like a slight scratch, my heart pounding as I approached the door. "Hi," I called, feeling a little silly. I couldn't see anyone in there. Lily lived alone. She didn't have pets. Silence. I tried to turn the doorknob, but it was locked. That seemed strange to me. In all the times I'd been in her apartment, I'd never seen a door locked inside. I shook my head, trying to shake the feeling of unease. "It must be the building settling down," you murmur. I forced myself to ignore it, and I went to bed. But sleeping was impossible. Every little creak of the apartment was amplified in the dark. The next morning, while drinking coffee, I decided to call Lily. "Hey, a quick question." I tried to sound casual. "Why is the door to the guest room locked?" There was a long pause, too long. "Oh, so she finally said, her tense voice. "There, I keep personal things. Nothing to worry about. Just leave it closed, okay?" Her tone made me shudder. She wasn't your typical Lily. "Sure, I was just curious." We changed the subject and talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. I tried to go on with my day as if nothing had happened, but the feeling that something was wrong didn't go away. That night the noises came back louder, more insistent. Bumps, scratches, and something else. Something that made my blood run cold. A dull thing. I stood in front of the door, my hand floating on the doorknob. "Hello," I whispered. "You need help?" The noises stopped immediately. The silence was even more terrifying. I didn't sleep at all that night at dawn. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I picked up the phone and called Lily again, this time without hiding my concern. "Lily, tell me the truth. What's in that room?" "Alex." Her voice was loaded with something I couldn't identify. Fear, regret. "I still hear noises. They are real." Another long silence. Then her voice came back. "I told you," more firmly. "Don't go in there." "But promise," she screamed in an almost desperate tone. I was in shock. "Okay, I promise." She hung up without saying goodbye. But it was too late. I had made up my mind. I couldn't ignore it. I spent the whole day debating on my own. In the end I decided to act myself. I had no evidence to call the police without sounding like a crazy woman at nightfall. When the noises returned, I went straight to the kitchen. I remembered seeing a keychain in one of the drawers. With shaky hands, I took it out and examined the keys. They were not labeled. One by one, I was testing them in the horseshoe of the door of the guest room. The first one did not fit either. The second one did not fit. But the third click, My breathing accelerated. My hand was shaking on the handle. I really wanted to know, yes. I turned the knob and pushed to the first thing that hit me was the smell. A damp smell and something else. Something sweet and stale that turned my stomach. I turned on the light. What I saw took my breath away. The room was full of strange things. It was not a normal guest room. There were no old boxes or stacks of books. There were symbols drawn on the walls with what looked like dried blood. Candles melted on an altar, improvised pages with strange writings arranged in patterns on the floor. But the worst, was in the center of the room. A pentagram drawn with tisa shone faintly and in the center of the pentagram a body. My stomach contracted. It was small, too small, grayish skin, limbs in an unnatural posture. But it was not dead, not completely, because while I was looking at it one of his fingers moved. I don't remember how I got out of that. I just know that suddenly I was outside, the door slammed shut behind me with gasping breath and a runaway pulse. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. My best friend Lily couldn't be involved in this, or yes. I picked up my phone with the intention of calling the police before I could dial. It rang. It was Lily with her heart pounding in her ears. I replied, "Lily, what the hell is in that room?" Her voice was cold. "You went inside. There's not a child there. What have you done?" She laughed a hollow and humorless laugh. "Oh, Alex, you have any idea what you've done? What was locked in there now is free." A low, guttural growl came out from behind the door. It didn't sound human. "Lily," I whispered away. "I'm sorry, Alex," she said in an almost sad tone. But there's no stopping it now. The call, it was cut on the other side of the door. The banging started to intensify. Something I was trying to get out, and then the wood started to splinter. I ran. I left the apartment. I went downstairs at full speed and threw myself into the street in the distance. A heartbreaking scream broke the night, then another and another. I turned my head just in time to see something dark jumping from the window of the guest room. Something big. Something fast, and I understood with absolute certainty that my life, and perhaps that of everyone in this city, had just changed everything forever, because I couldn't resist the temptation to open a locked door. The security cameras were supposed to make me feel safe. Instead, they became a window to a nightmare from which I couldn't escape. It all started when I got a job as a night security guard in the Oakwood office complex, a sprawling set of buildings on the outskirts of town. The pay was decent and the schedule suited me. I had always been a night owl and the job seemed easy. Monitor the cameras, do a couple of rounds, and make sure nothing suspicious happened. The first few weeks were quiet. I settled into the small security office, a room barely bigger than a closet with monitors that showed the images from the cameras scattered throughout the complex. I spent my nights observing the empty hallways, the dark parking lots, the quiet lobbies. From time to time I saw a janitor or some employee who worked late, but mostly it was just me and the constant humming of the monitors. It was in my third week when I noticed something strange. I was doing my usual check of the cameras when I saw a flicker moving on one of the screens showing a fourth-floor hallway. I squinted at the grainy black-and-white image for a second. I swore I'd seen a figure at the end of the hallway. But when I blinked it had disappeared. I became convinced that it was my tired eyes and too brown. But in the following nights it kept happening, rapid movements at the edge of the frame. Shadows that seemed to move against the light, figures that appeared and they disappeared too fast to track, always just for an instant. I began to dread my shifts. The quiet of the night that once relaxed me became oppressive, laden with invisible threats. I found myself constantly checking the monitors, my heart beating fast. Every time I thought I saw something move. A month after starting work, things got worse. I was watching the transmission from the underground parking lot when I saw it. A figure, unmistakable clear, walking between parked cars, moved with an unnatural gait, almost sliding instead of walking, and its proportions were wrong, too high, too thin. I couldn't be human. I swallowed hard and grabbed my flashlight and radio with sweaty hands. "Here, Johnson in security," I said, pressing the microphone. "I have an unauthorized individual in the parking lot. I request reinforcements." Silence. I tried again. Nothing. I knew I should stay in the office and wait for help, but the thought that this thing was roaming freely through the building prompted me to act. I unlocked the safe, and let's make sure the number that was happening increased my anxiety when the doors finally opened. I cautiously went out, the flashlight illuminating the gloom. "Hello," I called, my voice resounding on the concrete. "Security, show it of water in the distance." I moved between the cars, checking row by row. There was no one. I began to think that I had imagined it when I heard it, a soft shuffling sound coming from behind a large SUV. "Get out now," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm armed." The noise stopped for a moment. The silence was total. Then slowly a figure emerged from behind the vehicle. My breath was short. I was tall, impossibly tall. His head almost brushed the roof of the parking lot. His limbs were long and articulated incorrectly, like those of a praying mantis, but the worst thing was his face, or the absence of him. Where his features should have been, there was only smooth and pale skin. I staggered back. The next he was right in front of me, his empty face inches from mine. I screamed, closing my eyes and shooting blindly. The shot resounded in the enclosed space. When I opened my eyes, there was nothing. With trembling hands, I ran back to the elevator, pressing repeatedly the button to go up as the doors closed. I saw something move in the shadows at the end of the garage, back at the security office. I sat out in the chair with my heart pounding against my ribs. I looked at the monitors expecting to see something, but everything seemed normal. Then I noticed something that made me feel nauseous. On the screen in the parking lot where I had shot, there was a dark spot on the ground, but there was no bullet hole on the concrete. There was no sign of impact. Instead, the blob began to move. It slowly expanded, crawling on the ground like a puddle of oil. I watched it in horror as it spread across the walls and the ceiling. In a matter of minutes, the entire parking lot was covered by that sticky darkness. Then one by one the other cameras began to show the same thing. The darkness was spreading throughout the building. I tried the radio trapped. Then I saw something on the monitors in the lobby. A figure emerged from the darkness, then another, and soon another. Dozens of those creatures filled the screens, moving with that same unnatural grace. They came for me. I blocked the door with everything I could find, chairs, filing cabinets, whatever it was to buy time. But as I looked at the monitors, I noticed something terrifying. The creatures slid through the walls like smoke. The lights in the office started to flicker. A soft scratch was heard on the other side of the door I backed up to. The corner my eyes going from the monitor to the door on the screen, I saw the hallway outside the office was full of those things, all standing in front of the door waiting for the scratch. Got louder. The door started to bend in, roasting under invisible pressure. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the worst, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes again, sunlight filtered through the small office window. The door was intact on the monitors. The hallways were empty. People came to start the day. As if nothing had happened, I staggered out of the office hoping to find signs of darkness, but everything it seemed normal. I quit that same day. I never understood what happened. But sometimes at night I still think I see shadows moving at the edge of my vision, and I wonder I really ran away that night, or did something follow me home? The first time I saw her standing in my bedroom window, I thought she was dreaming. By the third night I knew she was living a nightmare. It had been a month since I moved into my new apartment, a cozy studio on the 4th floor of an old building in downtown Chicago. Rent was surprisingly affordable for the area, which should have been my first sign that something wasn't right. But I was too excited about my new job and the idea of living in the heart of the city to question my good fortune. The first few weeks passed without incident. I settled in my routine. I decorated my space and explored the neighborhood. I loved the character of the old building, the creaky wooden floors, the ornate molds, the large windows that let in lots of natural light. It felt like home. Then on a cold autumn night I suddenly woke up with the feeling that someone was watching me. I opened my eyes suddenly, and there she was, a woman standing at the foot of my bed, silhouette Ada against the window. I froze, my heart hammered in my chest. It didn't move, it didn't speak. It just stood there looking at me. It must have blinked, because in the next instant it had disappeared. I sat up, turned on the lamp on my bedside table, and looked around in despair. But my apartment was empty. The door was still locked. The windows were still closed. I convinced myself that it had been a vivid dream, the product of the stress and an overactive imagination. The next night happened again. This time I was sure I was awake. The woman appeared next to my closet, her figure blurred and indistinct but undeniably present. I tried to talk, ask her who she was or what she wanted, but my voice failed me again, disappeared in a blink of an eye. By the third night it was a nervous mess. I hadn't slept well in days, jumped at any noise or shadow. I considered call to my landlord or even the police. But what was I going to say? That I was being haunted by a ghost? They'd think I was crazy that night, lying in bed, with every muscle tense in anticipation. I heard a soft shuffling sound coming from the living room. My breath got caught in my throat. Slowly, carefully, I reached for my phone on the bedside table, my fingers trembling. They found the eye, applied the flashlight, and turned it on, projecting an ace of light across the room. There she was, standing in the doorway, in the light of my phone. I could see her clearly. For the first time she was young, maybe in her 20s, with long dark hair and pale skin. She was wearing an old-fashioned nightgown, torn and stained, but it was her eyes that froze my blood, ample, pleading, full of such sadness, deep that made my heart ache. Who you are, I managed to whisper. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. She raised a hand, urgently pointing to something behind me. I turned around following her gesture, but I saw nothing but the wall of my room. When I looked back, she had disappeared. The next day, I couldn't concentrate on work. My mind repeated over and over again the encounters, trying to make sense of it. What was going on? I was either going crazy or my apartment was really haunted. During my lunch break, I decided to investigate the history of the building. What I found ran cold in my blood. In 1928, a young woman named Emily Carter had lived in my apartment. She had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, and her body was never found. The case had caused quite a stir at the time, with rumors of foul play and cover-ups, but like all scandals, eventually faded from public memory. As I looked at Emily Carter's blurry newspaper photo, my blood froze. It was her, the woman in my apartment that night. I waited for her, didn't try to sleep, didn't even crawl into bed, sat in my living room with the lights on, determined to face whatever was happening. Around midnight, the temperature in the room plummeted. My breath came out in visible clouds, and I felt goose-bumps bristle my arms. Then it appeared. This time it didn't disappear. It stood there looking at me with those sad eyes, its shape flickering like a candle flame. Emily, I said quietly. Emily Carter nodded, and a glimmer of relief crossed her face. What do you want? Why are you here? She pointed again, this time to my room. I stood up slowly with my legs. I walked to my bedroom with Emily's ghost following me silently. Once inside, he pointed to the wall behind my bed. I walked over with my hands over the worn wallpaper. There was something odd about it. A slight bump, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, with trembling fingers. Underneath, there was a small door built into the wall itself. A hidden compartment. I looked at Emily. She nodded, encouraging me. Taking a deep breath, I opened the small door. Inside there was a space the size of a shoebox, and in that space a wad of yellowed papers tied with a faded ribbon. When I took it out, Emily's shape began to fade, but before it disappeared completely, I saw a smile on her face, a smile of gratitude and relief. The papers turned out to be Emily's diary, and a series of letters told a story of love, betrayal, and murder. Emily had had an affair with a married man, a prominent businessman in the city. When he threatened to expose their relationship, he killed her and hid her body. The last entry in her diary detailed her plan to hide evidence of their affair in the wall of her apartment. In case something happened to her, I took the papers with the police. The next day caused quite a stir, reopening a case that had been cold for nearly a century. Forensic teams searched my apartment and eventually found Emily's remains hidden in the basement walls of the building. Her killer was already posthumously charged with her murder. Emily's family and great-nephews were finally able to give her a proper burial. As for me, I never saw Emily's ghost again after that night. But sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I feel a presence, not scary or unsettling, but comforting, as if someone was watching me. Grateful for the role I played in bringing her peace. The security cameras were supposed to make me feel safe. Instead, they became a window into a nightmare of the one I couldn't escape. It all started when I got a job as a night security guard at the Oakwood office complex, a sprawling set of buildings on the outskirts of town. The pay was decent and the hours suited me. I had always been a night owl. Plus it seemed like an easy job. Just keep an eye on the cameras, do a couple of rounds, and make sure nothing suspicious happened. The first few weeks were quiet. I would settle in the small security office, a room barely bigger than a closet full of monitors that showed images of the entire complex. I would see empty areas, dark parking lots, silent lobbies. From time to time some night employee or cleaning staff would appear on the screen. But it was mostly just me, and the buzzing of the monitors was in my third week when I noticed something strange. I was checking the cameras as if from as usual, when I saw a flash of motion on a screen showing a fourth-floor hallway. I leaned forward, squinting at the low-quality black and white image. For a split second I swore I saw a figure at the end of the corridor, but when I blinked I was gone. I convinced myself it was just tiredness and too much caffeine, but in the following nights shadows continued to occur that moved where I didn't. They should have figures that appeared and disappeared too fast to follow them, always on different cameras, always just for an instant. I began to dread my shifts. The quiet of the night before comforting became oppressive. Constantly scans the monitors, feeling like something was lurking in the corners of the office. A month later everything got worse. I was watching the transmission from the underground parking lot when I saw it, an unmistakable Clara figure walking among the cars parked, but something wasn't right. His movements were wrong. He wasn't walking. He was sliding, and his proportions were too high. Too thin, my skin stood on end. I pressed the radio button. "Here, Johnson in security. There's an intruder in the parking lot. I request backups." Silence. I tried again. Nothing. The radio was dead. I knew I should stay in the office and wait for help. But the thought of leaving that thing roaming the building made me terrorized even more. With trembling hands, I unlocked the safe and made sure my flashlight illuminating the security La penumbra. I called, "Show it of water in the distance." I moved between the cars, checking each row with meticulous caution. I was about to give up when I heard a soft shuffle behind a large pickup truck. I raised my gun. "Get out right now, I'm armed." The sound stopped for a moment. Everything was completely silent, and then, slowly, a figure emerged from behind the vehicle. My breath stuck in my throat. It was tall, too tall, with long, thin limbs that bent at wrong angles like the legs of a praying mantis. But the worst thing was its face, or the lack of it. Where the eyes, nose, and mouth should be, there was only a pale surface, and Lisa stumbled backwards, trying to draw my gun. It moved in an instant, went from being on the other side of the parking lot to being right in front of me. Panic took over me. I closed my eyes and pulled the trigger. The roar of the shot reverberated in the enclosed space. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone. But something worse was about to begin. I staggered back, screen of the parking lot where I had shot. There was a dark spot on the ground. At first I thought it was blood. But when I looked closer, I saw that it had no texture or reflection. It was like a shadow that moved. Terror took hold of me as I watched as the stain slowly spread like an oil slick that climbed up the walls and seeped into the ceiling, and then, one by one, the other monitors began to show the same thing. The parking lot, the corridors, the offices, everything was being consumed by that darkness. A movement on the screen in the lobby made my blood run cold. The creatures were coming out of the blackness. First one, then another. In seconds, dozens of these tall, faceless figures filled the screens, advancing with that unnatural walk, as if floating. They were moving towards me. I ran to the door and tore it off with everything I found: chairs, filing cabinets, anything that could buy me time. But when I went back to the monitors, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. The camera in the corridor outside the security office showed the same darkness, and those figures were just behind the door. A soft scratch began to be heard from the other side. Then a knocking, and then the door began to bulge inwards as if something invisible was pushing it with an inhuman force. I closed my eyes, preparing for it. And then nothing. When I opened my eyes, the sunlight came through the window of the security office. The clock on the wall read 7 in the morning. The monitors showed the complex in its usual state. There was no darkness. There were no creatures. There was no trace of what had happened. I left the office like a zombie, expecting to find something, anything. But the corridors were normal. The employees arrived too on his morning shift as if nothing had happened. The parking lot had no traces of the dark spot. Even my pistol was still fully loaded. It was as if everything had been a nightmare. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt that same morning. I handed in my badge and left. Since then I can't help but feel that something follows me. Sometimes in the gloom of my apartment I see flashes of movement in the corner of my apartment. Mind you, sometimes I wake up at night with the feeling that someone is standing by my bed, waiting, lurking, because now I know that there are things in the dark that shouldn't exist, and even worse, I know that one of them could have followed me home. The moment I discovered that hidden room, I knew that my teacher wasn't just eccentric, he was dangerous. But by then it was too late. I was supposed to that. It was an easy job. Professor Blackwood, my favorite professor in the psychology department, had asked me to take care of his house while attending a conference in Europe for 2 weeks in his huge Victorian mansion surrounded by books and antiques, with nothing to do but feed his cat and water his plants for a penniless college student like me. It sounded like a dream come true. House marveled at the professor's immense library and collection of strange objects: tribal masks from Africa, ornate daggers from the Middle East, delicate porcelain figures from China. Each room looked like a small museum. But on the 4th night everything changed. I was reading in the professor's study when I heard a thud coming from the teacher's studio. When I heard a thud coming from the floor of, I froze, listening attentively. The house, it was old. I thought maybe it was just settling, but then I heard again, a louder bang. This time seemed to be coming from the attic. With my heart pounding, I grabbed a flashlight from a desk drawer and went upstairs. The attic door was at the end of a long hallway, hidden behind a thick velvet curtain. When I approached, a sound of soft scratches came from the other side. My palm was sweaty when I turned the handle. To my surprise, the door, it wasn't locked. The attic was full of boxes and old furniture, all covered in dust. I pointed the flashlight around me. but I didn't see anything strange. Then I noticed something, a slight indentation in one of the walls. I approached and ran my hand over the surface. There was a hidden panel, pressure, and it opened with a soft click. Behind the wall there was a small room immaculately clean. The walls were covered with the photos were of students, dozens of them. Some of them I recognized from my classes. But the most disturbing thing was the expression of their empty faces, their eyes. Unfocused as if they were in a trance with trembling hands, I opened one of the folders inside. In Professor Blackwood's neat calligraphy there were detailed notes on techniques, mind control, cognitive restructuring, psychological manipulation, and worst of all, there was a picture of me. The sound of the front door opening jolted me out of the trance. The teacher wasn't supposed to come back for another week. My blood froze. I closed the hidden door and headed towards the exit of the attic. Just as I was going out into the hallway, I heard her voice. "Sarah, you're up there." Her tone was kind, but now I realized something I'd never noticed before. There was something cold in her voice, calculating. "Yes, teacher," I replied, forcing calm. "I thought hearing something in the attic." "Ah, I see," she said, approaching. She has always been a very curious student. Her shadow fell on me. Her smile was the same as always, but her empty eyes. "Come," Sarah said softly. "Let's talk a little." My mind was working at full speed. I couldn't let her know that I had found her secret room. I smiled nervously, feigning disinterest. "It was nothing," I said, trying to sound carefree. "Probably the cat." Professor Blackwood didn't take his eyes off me. "Surely," she asked with a smile that made my blood run cold. "You seem restless." I took a step towards the stairs, trying to stay calm. "I'm fine, just a little tired." The professor nodded slowly, but didn't move. He kept blocking the hallway. "You know," Sarah said quietly, "I've been watching you for a while now. You're smart, curious." The guy who stood out. I swallowed saliva. "Thank you, Professor. That's why I think you'd be perfect for my next phase of research." A chill ran down my spine. Blackbot's smile widened. "Oh yes, an experiment, something few could comprehend." Took a step forward. I took a step back. My fingers feel the attic doorknob. "I'd love to talk about it, Professor," I said, trying to look relaxed. "But I have an essay to finish." "It won't take you long," he said softly. His hand moved fast, faster than I would have expected for someone his age. He grabbed my arm tightly. "Please," Sarah said, "don't make this difficult." Panic came over me. I couldn't reason with him. I couldn't run, so I did the only thing I could think of. I dug my elbow into his stomach with all my might. The air escaped from his lungs in a groan of surprise and loosened his grip enough to get me free. I ran. I didn't look back. I went down the stairs at full speed, feeling his footsteps behind me. I came to the front door, but before I could open it, I felt his hand on my shoulder. "You're not going to leave?" he screamed in a desperate act. I grabbed a heavy porcelain figure from the table at the entrance and threw it at his head. A thud was heard. The professor fell to the ground unconscious. My hands trembled as I opened the door and ran out into the street. I didn't stop until I reached the police. When the authorities searched Blackwood's home, they found his secret room and all his notes. Discovered that he had been conducting illegal experiments on students for years. Some had disappeared. Others were never the same. The case shocked the university. Blackwood was arrested, but he never revealed the full extent of his experiments. He committed suicide in his cell before they could try him. Sometimes I wonder if he had already started his investigation with me, if there were gaps in my memory that I could never fill, if somehow he was still inside my head. I changed universities the next semester, but I never forgot the most important lesson I learned in that place: the real monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they sit at the front of the classroom, teaching you with a smile.